Chapter 1051. The Fall of Falcon Scott, 69. After battling the harrowing corrupted Titan for 3 long months, Saint Tyrus of the White Feather clan had finally been defeated. Even though she had miraculously managed to survive, with Skytide incapacitated, there was no one left to stop the winter beast from advancing on the city. The Titan was already moving closer to the largest and only siege capital left standing in the region. The temperature was falling, and the winds were picking up, heralding the descent of a terrible blizzard. Inevitably, a series of disastrous events was bound to happen. The first of these events, and the catalyst that sparked the chain reaction, was the withdrawal of the White Feather clan from the Antarctic Center. They had been sent here to support the first evacuation army on behalf of the great clan Valor, but were not part of it. Naturally, their first priority was to preserve their saint's life, even if the awakened of White Feather had decided to stay. For whatever reason, Army Command would have insisted that they retreat in haste. The life of an allied transcendent was too precious of a resource for the government, too. As the clan's compound turned into a hub of frenetic activity, with everyone hastily preparing for departure, Sunny and Jet were left to their own devices. After their conversation with Roan ended, they found themselves all but ignored by the hurrying members of the clan. No one even remembered to shoo the two ascended away. They were not in a hurry to leave either, mostly because neither of them really knew what to do. The situation had changed too fast and too dreadfully. Sunny felt lost and resigned, and although Jet was trying to hide it, he could see that she was shaken as well. The two of them found a place out of the way and just stood there for a while, silent. Eventually Sunny said, "Roan is wrong. It's not all over. Even without Tyrus, we still have a transcendent. You, me, Bloodwave, we should be able to give the Winter Beast a fight. We already killed one Titan, so why can't we kill another?" Jet somberly shook her head. There's an abyssal gap between a fallen Titan and a corrupted one, in terms of power. Tyrus was not able to fight the Winter Beast because she was a transcendent. She was able to fight it because she was a transcendent whose aspect countered the creature's powers, and an astonishingly steadfast one, at that. Even then, you don't really understand it, do you? Sunny frowned. I guess not. What is it exactly that I don't understand? Soul Reaper let out a grave sigh. Sunny, there's currently around 30 million people left in Falcon Scott, as well as 20,000 soldiers. There are also 1,000 or so awakened veterans. However, all of them combined wouldn't be able to do anything against a corrupted Titan. Even if there were 10 times more, the result would be the same. Yet Tyrus alone held the creature back for 3 months. What does that mean? He stared at her silently for a while, then turned away with a dark expression on his face. It means that one saint is worth more than 30 million people, 20,000 soldiers, and 1,000 awakened. A corner of Jet's mouth twisted slightly. Smart. Sunny shook his head. What are you getting at, though? The hint of a smile disappeared from Soul Reaper's face. She lingered for a few moments, then said, I am trying to tell you that there are no you, me, and Bloodwave. Bloodwave is going to leave with the White Feather clan. Do you think they are going to let Tyrus travel across the strait unprotected? She is unconscious and vulnerable. What happens if something attacks the ship? Neither Army Command nor Valor would allow that to happen. So, the House of Night will do their best to protect the most valuable asset, which means that Bloodwave won't be here when the Winter Beast arrives. Sunny gritted his teeth, trying to suppress the blinding fury that threatened to consume his mind. This is such crap. Jet's face twitched, but she calmly shook her head. No, it's simply resource management. Sunny stared at her with bewilderment for a few moments, then suddenly laughed. So what? This is it? It really is all over? What about the rest of the poor fools who are still stuck in this city? Soul Reaper remained silent for a while. Then she said evenly, well, there are 30 million people left here. With the current speed of evacuation, if the Winter Beast comes tomorrow, 20 million will die. If it comes the day after tomorrow, 10 million will die. Theoretically. Of course, in reality, things are not going to go that smoothly. Sunny gave her a dark look. How so? Jet sighed. Something like that. It won't remain a secret for long. As soon as the rumors spread, this whole city will go crazy. Evacuation queue. Forget about it. People will be storming the port and jumping off the cliffs. It's going to be pandemonium." Sonny opened his mouth, startled by her callousness. However, it only lasted a moment. He was just as jaded. After all, if he had used his brain for a moment instead of allowing himself to be rattled, he would have come to the same conclusions. He cursed. "So what are we supposed to do? The two of us. I refuse to believe that there's no way to slow down the winter beast. Come on, we just need to hold it off for a couple of days." Soul Reaper gave him a long look. After a while, she said, "Sonny, you might survive the descent of the winter beast. Maybe I can survive it too. My cohort is gone, though, while yours is not. And your soldiers, they will definitely die. Ascended like us have no business facing a corrupted titan. As for awakened, they don't stand a chance. So, if I were you, I would make sure that they get on a ship as fast as possible. Everything else comes later." He smiled bitterly. "That's it? You're a damn colonel. Can't you do something?" Jet simply shook her head. "Once the news breaks, my rank won't have any meaning anymore. Who cares about hierarchy in the face of annihilation? Sonny, this is going to be an every man for himself situation very soon. We are all going to have to make some choices. The best we can do is make sure that we don't regret them later. So keep that in mind, and do your best." "That's all the advice I can give." She sighed, then briefly glanced at the star insignia on her shoulder and walked away. Before she left, however, Sonny shouted, "Oh yeah, so are you going to get on a ship yourself?" Soul Reaper paused. She remained silent for a few moments, then said without turning back, "I sort of hate ships, to be honest. It is really a pity." And then she left. Sonny found himself alone, staring at the empty space where Master Jet had been a few seconds ago. Shaking his head, he scoffed and turned away. What a coincidence. I sort of hate ships too. Chapter 1052, The Fall of Falcon Scott, 70. The first thing Sonny did was go find Belle, Dorn, and Samara. However, none of them had returned from the Dream Realm yet. All three were peacefully asleep in their pods, not knowing that back in the waking world, Falcon Scott was now on the verge of destruction. For now, all he could do was wait. Not wishing to waste time, Sonny tried to go through the official channels to make sure that his cohort was not going to be left out of the evacuation plans. At that point, however, things had already started going out of control, just as Master Jet had predicted. The government complex was in a state of frenzy. The information regarding the withdrawal of the White Feather clan and the impending doom approaching the city was supposed to be kept strictly secret, but with people responsible for withholding it realizing that they themselves would most likely be left behind, there was no way for the truth to remain hidden. The news spread through the city like wildfire. With it came panic. Sonny spent some time fruitlessly trying to get the logistics officers, or anyone at all, to issue an order for his cohort to evacuate. But no one knew what to do, or even if they had authority to do anything. Worse still, as soon as St. Tyrus had been defeated, the influence the Winter Beast was exerting on the region seemed to have doubled in strength. Now, even the robust communication array of the siege capital was having trouble connecting the local branch of Army Command to central headquarters. Even if there was a leader who could bring order to this complicated situation, they were simply too far away. In the end, all he could get from the administrative personnel was a vague promise of a priority placement while boarding the leaving ships. They did not seem to know quite what it meant themselves, but the underlying message was clear. If he could get a spot on one of the evacuation vessels, no one was going to stop him. In fact, this was true for all the surviving soldiers of the First Army. If they wanted to leave, they could. Who was going to stop them? After all, the soldiers were armed, while the refugees were not. In the ruthless mathematics of war, their lives were also more valuable. In short, the situation had deteriorated to the point of turning into complete lawlessness. The government officers were simply unable to control it anymore. Every man for himself. Sonny was slightly stunned by how quickly the city had descended into chaos. All it took was a few hours. There were some exceptions, of course. For example, someone high up in the chain of command managed to enforce the evacuation of the wounded from the army hospital. However, no one knew how effective exactly the execution of that order would be, or how quickly the evacuation would happen. Sonny was reluctant to leave Luster's fate to chance, though. He returned to the barracks, which had turned hectic and feverish in his absence. Finally, His soldiers woke up, emerging from their sleeping pods with confused expressions on their faces. Not only was the building full of noise, but their leader was also waiting for them with a grim expression on his face. Sparing the three awakened a single glance, Sonny said, "Let's go get Luster and Kimmy. I'll explain what is happening on the way." They made their way to the hospital. Outside, the cold was slowly turning unbearable, but despite that, crowds of frightened people were flowing through the streets, some aimless and lost, some full of frantic determination. The situation inside the hospital was even worse. Unlike the rest of the people in the city, the medical officers had received direct orders to transfer all the patients to the port fortress and await immediate evacuation. However, the orders were vague and hastily compiled, lacking a lot of important details and instructions. Aside from that, moving severely injured soldiers was not as easy as transporting healthy people. Some required special care, some could not be moved at all, unless an awakened healer got personally involved. Rattled, Sonny finally understood what the word pandemonium meant. Cutting through the chaos, he and his soldiers reached Luster's room. After a short conversation with a panicked nurse, they received verbal permission to take him away and barged inside. Neither Luster nor Kimmy seemed surprised to see them. In fact, Kim had already prepared the wounded awakened for departure. He was dressed, freshly bandaged, and holding a pack full of necessary medical supplies and healing agents. The young man had also received a very generous dose of painkillers. Seeing Sonny, he smiled stupidly. "Cap Major." "Huh? Where are we going?" Sonny looked at Kim and gave her a nod. "Eastern Antarctica. We just need to find you a boat." The young woman silently took the medicine pack from Luster, hung it across her chest, then forced him to climb on her back. Considering that she was much smaller than the young man, the two of them looked rather comical. But of course, as an awakened, Kim was more than strong enough to carry a person. Before they left, Samara suddenly spoke, her usually calm face turning slightly pale. "Captain, what about Quentin? We can't just leave him here." Sonny looked at her for a moment, then somberly shook his head. "We have to. It doesn't matter anyway. He is in the nightmare by now. If he survives, the spell will create an ascended body for him. If not, taking him with us won't make any difference." The five of them grew solemn, then reluctantly followed him out. Luster was mumbling something under his nose, but the rest were deathly silent. On the street, Sonny looked around, then approached a random military vehicle and used his bare hand to tear through the armored alloy, destroying the locking mechanism of its door. With how many soldiers had perished during the siege, there was a surplus of machinery in the city. No one was going to miss one PTV. It was just that he had no time to request proper access. Luckily, Army transports did not have a complicated startup sequence. All he had to do was override the controls with his military ID, then access the internal computer and assign the vehicle to the first irregular company. After that, the PTV recognized Sonny as its valid driver. "Damn, I never even got close to stealing a PTV when I lived in the outskirts, and now I'm swiping one as an ascended. What kind of logic is that?" Darkly amused, he sent the vehicle barreling forward and maneuvered it through the crowded streets at high speed. "Hold on tight. We need to make a stop first, before going to the port." Soon he reached the dormitory tower where Professor Obel and Beth were living. Sonny stopped the vehicle and dissipated into the shadows without wasting any time. A few seconds later, he was standing in front of a familiar door. Sonny knocked on it several times, praying that they were both home. Luckily, they were. Walking inside, Sonny quickly looked around the apartment, then turned to Professor Obel and Beth. From their expressions, he understood that they already knew what was happening. Beth's eyes were wide and shaken. "Sonny, is it true?" He nodded, then said steadily, "Get your things. We need to leave as soon as possible." The young woman seemed startled. "Leave? Leave to where?" Sonny spared her a quick glance. "To the port, of course. You need to get on a ship." She took a small step back. But our tickets are not due until..." Taking a step forward, Sonny took her by the shoulders and looked her in the eyes. "Forget about the tickets. You are leaving today. Now go. There's no time to waste. Neither Beth nor Professor Obel had a lot of things to gather, so they were out of the apartment in less than 15 minutes. The old man remained quiet throughout all that time, only speaking when spoken to. His eyes were calm, but burdened. Diving from the chilling cold into the warm interior of the PTV, Sonny checked to see if everyone had settled and drove off. Two beams of light cut through the darkness as the vehicle sped through the snow-covered streets. Once again, they were heading north this time, toward the port fortress of the doomed siege capital. Chapter 1053, The Fall of Falcon Scott, 71. Getting close to the port turned out to be complicated. There were too many people and too many vehicles heading the same way. At some point, driving forward became simply impossible. The road was utterly jammed, which was a truly strange scene. Back in NQSC, PTVs were somewhat of a rare sight, but Falcon Scott was brimming with military transports of all kinds. Understanding that their vehicle was truly stuck, Sonny grimaced and told everyone to get out. As they did, a litany of sounds assaulted their ears: the rumbling hum of engines, the ear-piercing wail of electric horns, the anxious shouts of countless people, all of it fused into a cacophonous cloud of noise. Around them, a vast crowd of people was flowing through the congested road, the vehicles waiting hopelessly for a chance to move forward. There were men, women, and children, some carrying bags and backpacks containing their belongings, some empty-handed. A driver of a massive transport was standing on the side of the cabin, screaming furiously for everyone to get out of his way and that he had orders to reach the port. His yells were useless, of course. Even if the crowd of people parted, there was another vehicle right in front of the transport, and another one after that, and another one after that, all similarly stuck. The people moving toward the port on foot were acting senselessly as well. It was not like they had a chance of getting on a ship simply by reaching the fortress. Most of them had simply panicked and lost all reason. Some had not even wanted to go, but were swept up by the crowd. In any case, the mob presented a serious obstacle to Sonny. Luckily, his uniform had turned out to be good enough of a deterrent. Where he walked, a small bubble of empty space magically appeared, allowing his group to advance forward with sufficient speed. Even in this state, the people were able to recognize a master. Some moved aside out of respect and reverence, some out of fear. This is damn. Sonny had considered himself an experienced person, and not without reason. From the starless void of the forgotten shore to the frozen hellscape of Antarctica, he had seen and lived through a lot of things, both incredible and terrifying. However, he had never experienced anything on the scale of what was currently happening in Falcon Scott. Even the destruction of the Ivory City did not quite come close. By the time the cohort reached the northern section of the wall, he was in a grim and sober mood. Here, there was another massive gate, its wings currently retracted into the framework of the barrier. Beyond it was a vast span of concrete that led directly to the edge of the tall cliffs. Usually there would be several organized lines of refugees waiting for their turn to use the elevators, and a lot of loader robots carrying cargo to and from the fortress. Now, however, the whole space was covered by a sea of people, all frantic to get closer to the edge and get a chance to descend to the coast. Someone was still operating the elevators, but the personnel of the transfer station had clearly given up on trying to control the mob. People were pressed tightly against the alloy barriers that were meant to prevent them from falling down, and some were even trying to climb over them. Nothing but a deadly fall awaited them on the other side, but the climbers seemed completely crazed. Sonny stared at the startling scene for a few moments, then looked away. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the unbearable cold of the polar winter run down his spine. A human mob was a frightening thing. It was even more frightening because everything had been fine just half a day ago. In such a short time, the whole city seemed to have gone mad. What are these fools hoping to accomplish? Sonny flinched. What was he hoping to accomplish? Gritting his teeth, he pushed forward through the crowd. His uniform and aura of authority cleared a path, and when that was not enough, he simply pushed people away. With Sonny's strength, it was not at all hard. Remaining gentle enough not to crush anyone was much harder. His soldiers followed. After experiencing the horrors of the nightmare spell and the tempering of countless battles, they all managed to remain composed. Beth and Professor Obel, however, looked deeply rattled. Still, they followed too. After some time, Sunny finally reached the entrance to one of the elevators. Currently, it was closed since the platform had not yet arrived. The refugees moved slightly aside to give the awakened some breathing room. However, he could still hear their voices. "Look, a master. You there, officer. What the hell is happening? Please take me with you. Curse you." He kept looking forward, ignoring the yells. Some people tried to ingratiate themselves with Sunny. Some cursed him out and demanded explanations. Some stupidly became overjoyed, as if the appearance of an ascended was going to solve everything. At least it's not as cold. With so many bodies around, the oppressive cold had retreated a little. Eventually, a massive platform arrived from the bottom of the cliffs, and the barrier retracted into the ground. Sunny led his group forward, taking a place near the opposite side of it. From there, he could see the ocean and the port fortress below. There was only one gargantuan ship currently anchored near it, with several large ferries coursing between the vessel and the pier to bring people aboard. The port itself was as crowded as the transfer station, and so was the pier. The situation inside seemed even more chaotic than here. After around 2,000 people and several large transport vehicles entered the platform, the barrier rose once again, and the elevator plummeted down. It seemed to be moving at a greater speed than usual, causing several passengers to yelp in fear. However, the platform safely reached the bottom of the cliffs in less than a minute. There was a walled road leading from the elevators to the port. Half of it was designated for pedestrian traffic. Half for the vehicles. That road was congested as well, but further away. Sunny noticed soldiers standing watch above it, carrying out their duty with lost expressions on their faces. Luckily, no nightmare creatures had chosen today to attack the city from the coast. "Let's go." Glancing at Kim, who was still carrying Luster, he continued toward the port. It took some time to reach it as well. The closer they got to the pier, the more frantic the atmosphere became. Some of the people here arrived after the terrible news of Sky Tide's defeat had spread, but some had been here even earlier, happily waiting to be brought away to eastern Antarctica as per the government queue. Now their chances of getting a spot on the ship were suddenly uncertain. But we were scheduled to be relocated today. Look, we have tickets. Get the hell out of my way. Sir, please, just let me through. When is the next ship arriving? The port officers were desperately trying to create some semblance of order, but it was useless. Still, only so many people could get aboard, so there were soldiers standing guard at the entrance to the pier and a barrier of alloy mesh that slid up and down, letting groups of refugees proceed further from time to time. Every time the barrier retracted, the crowd grew agitated and tried to push forward, only to be thrown back by the heavy gazes of the guards. Sunny hesitated. What now? Chapter 1054. The Fall of Falcon Scott, 72. He looked around, studying the barrier and the crowded pier that could be seen through the mesh. Then, suddenly, Sunny heard a familiar voice. "Move back, damn it. Don't push. If you have a spot in the queue, present an ID. If you are a member of the First Army, come that way. Get a hold of yourself and behave like people." He looked around and saw a tall, handsome man with indigo eyes and hair that seemed somewhere between black and blue standing in front of the barrier, struggling to hold back the panicked crowd. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Pushing closer to the man, he called out, "Knave, what the hell are you doing here?" The man, it was indeed Master Knave of the House of Night, blinked a couple of times, then looked in his direction with a confused expression. "Sunny? Gods, it's you. Doesn't matter. I'm now in charge of boarding, I guess." Sunny led his group to the barrier, stopping right in front of the Nightwalker. Knave gestured for a nearby awakened to assume his position and took a step to the side. He gave Sunny a somber look. "That ship over there is where I'm assigned to. We are going to leave once we're at capacity. Actually, we are already over capacity, but a few more people can still be squeezed in, so..." Sunny frowned. "What about Bloodwave?" The Nightwalker sighed. "He led the other ship away a few hours ago, with St. Tyrus aboard. There will be more ships tomorrow, and more the day after that if the Winter Beast does not arrive sooner. But Uncle won't be coming back. He'll guard the strait until the relocation is over, and then We will resume evacuating people over the ocean to the northern quadrant. Sunny nodded. Figures. Listen. Nave spoke first, interrupting him. Do you need to get on the ship? Sunny grew quiet, suddenly ashamed for no reason. Strangely, he felt thankful to the Nightwalker for not forcing him to say it aloud. After a few moments of awkward silence, Sunny shook his head. Not me. I just need to place a tether inside. Ascended could simply retreat into the dream realm whenever they wished. Even if their tether remained in the Antarctic Center, a saint would then be able to bring them back to the waking world, to a safer region. Granted, there were no saints on the Ivory Island, so Sunny was a bit more inconvenienced in that regard. Of course, leaving the waking world was not an instantaneous process. It required some time and absolute concentration, so doing it in the middle of a battle was usually impossible. Any Ascended that remained in the city would have to travel to the Dream Realm before the Winter Beast arrived, or risk annihilation with the rest of the mundane people. Still, taking up a spot on a ship would be a waste, and Sunny had long decided to stay and try to stall the Titan anyway. He looked at Nave. I don't need one, but my people. Sunny glanced at Beth, Professor Obel, and the members of his cohort. Nave looked at them too. His face fell. The Nightwalker hesitated for a few moments, then said quietly, Sunny, I have 3 spots reserved as a member of the crew. I will give you those. Beyond that, however, I can get the rest of your cohort on board too. Members of the First Army have a priority right to be evacuated, but those additional spots, they will come at the expense of civilians with officially issued tickets. So it's your decision. He paused, and then added apologetically, Sorry, but you have to make it quick. This is going to be the last batch we let in tonight. As though to echo his words, the mesh barrier suddenly slid into the ground with a metallic screech. The soldiers started checking the IDs and letting people pass through one by one. Sunny froze for a moment. His face grew still. So, his heart grew heavy. So this is what it came to. 3 spots, or having to displace civilians who had a spot in the queue. His soldiers had all heard what Nave said. Sunny turned around, looking at them. Kim, Luster, Dorn, Samara, Bell, Beth, Professor Obel. What was he supposed to do? Curse it all. As Sunny studied the faces of his soldiers, Bell, Dorn, and Samara briefly glanced at each other. Then, the giant man looked at Sunny and slightly shook his head. There were no words spoken, and yet for a moment, Sunny felt as though his heart was pierced by a sharp blade. He lowered his head, then looked at Professor Obel. The old man met his gaze, and the two of them remained motionless for several seconds, as if having a silent conversation. Finally, Sunny looked at the mob of frightened refugees, crowding behind the line of the barrier, all desperate to be saved. He sighed. How terrible. Why the hell did I want to be an officer? God's no amount of the damned contribution points was worth it. Then, Sunny straightened his back and said confidently, Beth, Professor Obel, you go in first. Beth gave him a startled glance, but the old man gently pushed her forward. They moved past Naive, the young woman crossing the line first. However, as soon as she did, Professor Obel silently took a step back. At the same time, Sunny pushed Kim and Luster. His push, though, was not too gentle. The two stumbled past Nave, ending up on the other side of the line, too. They were one of the last people to be let through. A moment later, the barrier rose with a screech, and a wall of alloy mesh cut off the pier from the rest of the port. Sunny, Professor Obel, Samara, Dorn, and Bell remained on one side. Kim, Luster, and Beth were on the other. The young woman turned around, confused, when she saw the old man behind the fence. Her eyes widened. Professor, what? Why are you? Professor Obel smiled. It's all right, Beth. We already had that conversation, remember? Stop being stubborn and forgive this old man. Ah, my old bones really can't endure another journey. She grabbed the mesh, frantic. No, you can't. How could you? He sighed. I only have a few more years left to live, at best, Beth. I might have accomplished a lot in this life, but it's coming to an end. The old man chuckled. You will accomplish even more given time. What do you think I was already brilliant at your age? Gods, no. I barely knew how to tie my shoes. Letting someone young take my place is a privilege of mine, especially someone like you, or awakened Kim over there. Beth stared at him for a few long moments, her eyes glistening. Then, she turned to Sonny. Sonny, what? What about? He scoffed. I'll be fine. It's like you don't know me. There's not a single selfless bone in my body, so you don't really have to worry about my safety. At that point, Kim finally spoke. Captain, Sonny glanced at her and frowned. You keep Luster and Beth safe. Who knows what will happen? Go board the ship and get the hell out of here, Kim. That's an order. He remained silent for a moment, and then added, Also, it's Major. Damn it. And that was that. Soon, Kim, Luster, and Beth boarded a ferry and were taken to the towering vessel. Sonny and the rest remained in the doomed siege capital, in Falcon Scott. The air was getting colder and colder. Chapter 1055, The Fall of Falcon Scott, 73. After things were settled, Sonny did not really know what to do. Professor Obel wanted to go back to the dormitory, for now, so Sonny asked Belle, Dorn, and Samara to take the old man there. After that, they were supposed to return to the barracks. Left alone, Sonny remained motionless for a few minutes, then used Shadow Step to sneak aboard Nave's ship. Placing a tether there did not take him much time. After the invisible mark was created, he used the same method to return to the port fortress. It was already night, of course. Night and day were absolutely the same during the long winter, here in Antarctica. Still, it meant that the winter beast would arrive in around 12 hours, at the earliest, and in no more than 40 at the latest. Sonny slowly made his way back to the elevators. No one was moving in the opposite direction of the port, so he did not have to force his way through the crowd. He just walked slowly, moving aside to let vehicles pass from time to time. The elevators were going up entirely empty as well. His lonesome figure startled the crowd of people waiting for the platform to arrive at the upper transfer station. Sonny spared them a heavy glance, then sighed and dissipated into the shadow. He had no desire to travel through the mob again. To waste as little essence as possible, he simply glided through the darkness and appeared some distance away, in the shadow of the city wall. Then, he used a lift to reach the battlements and finally escaped the panicked sea of people. From here, he could see the vast expanse of the city. Falcon Scott was bathed in darkness and suffused with stark artificial light. Snowflakes danced in the frigid air, and above it all, the ghostly aurora swirled like a celestial river of ghostly flames. Countless stars shone coldly high above. Sonny looked at the dreamlike scene for a few moments, then sighed. How come it looks so beautiful? On the other side of the wall was the ocean. He could see the port below, the overflowing mass of people within it, and the lone battleship towering above the dark waters. Sonny walked along the length of the wall, keeping his eye on the vessel. There were soldiers standing watch on the wall. Strangely enough, none of them seemed in a hurry to leave their posts. In fact, he could feel a strange mood permeating the air. The crowd of refugees below was almost frenzied, but here on the battlements, the members of the First Army were almost tranquil. It was not the resigned tranquility of desperation either, just unvarnished calmness of people who had been through hell and did not fear the end. Soon he heard one of the soldiers say, Look, it's moving. Sonny could see it as well. The battleship was finally departing. The titanic chain rattled as it rose, soon revealing a massive anchor. Then, slowly, the giant vessel started to move, distancing itself from the port. Its departure caused the people packed into the fortress to cry out, the litany of their voices flying on the wind to reach his ears. A raspy female voice responded to the soldier. Poor guys. I feel bad for them. It's too damn cold. The first male voice sounded again after a moment of silence. Yeah, I hope someone in the port will have enough sense to hand out food, blankets, and something hot to drink. Speaking of something to drink, give that thing here. Sonny frowned. Wait, don't those voices sound familiar? He looked at the pair of talkative soldiers. One of them was a man in the uniform of the First Army. The other was an awakened woman wearing a beautiful enchanted robe. The two of them were passing a flask of something fragrant between each other while idly observing the departure of the battleship. Sonny tilted his head, surprised. They were Sergeant Gere and Lieutenant Karen, two officers who had been under his command during the hellish march to Falcon Scott. He had not seen them after reaching the siege capital. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then said, "Hey, you." Karen flinched and grabbed the parapet of the battlement with both hands. Her face paled a little. Gear, I think I drank too much. I just heard the devil calling out to me." The mundane soldier scoffed. "Ain't no way you are drunker than me. Aren't you awakened supposed to be stupidly tough, though, huh? I thought I heard him too. Weird." Sonny sighed. "That's because I'm standing right behind you." Both of them slowly turned around and stared at him for a few moments. Then, sincere smiles suddenly appeared on their faces. "Captain, sir, you're here too?" He rolled his eyes, then came closer and leaned on the parapet beside them. "Yes, I'm here too." After the caravan reached the city, the soldiers and awakened he had led were absorbed back into the First Army and sent to reinforce the garrison. He had met a few here and there during the siege, but largely Sonny had no idea what had happened to them. It was strange to see Gere and Karen again. He studied them for a bit, then asked, "The two of you did not board the ship?" Sergeant Gere hesitated, then shrugged relaxedly. No. It just feels weird to leave all these people behind and run away. Actually, pretty much no one I know went and took a spot for themselves. Most of us First Army grunts are staying." He took a sip from the flask and chuckled. "It's like we all made a weird suicide pact." Karen pulled the flask out of his hand and smiled. "It's all right, though. Actually, I feel like I was supposed to die in Erebus Field. That would have been sad." She took a big gulp and sighed with pleasure. "Because everyone there died. But here, we already made sure that 170 million people escaped. By tomorrow, it's going to be 180. That's a lot of people. That's a job well done, if you ask me. And if we manage to hold out for a day or two more, then that's going to be even better." Gere nodded. "That is the reason why we were sent here in the first place, isn't it? To make sure that these people escape. So saving ourselves at their expense just feels weird, that's all." Sonny studied them for a few moments, remaining silent. Then, he sighed. "I guess I feel the same way. Plus, I really hate losing, as well." Karen and Gere looked at him with complicated expressions. "Sir, you're staying too?" Sonny smiled slightly. "Yeah, but don't get me wrong, I'm not planning on dying heroically. Unlike some people, I haven't given up on giving that beast a good fight." The two soldiers were quiet for a bit. Then Gere suddenly laughed. "Good. That's good hell. Now that I know that you're going to be with us too, sir, I am starting to feel that maybe there's still a chance. We already killed one Titan, didn't we? What's one more?" Karen lingered for a moment, then offered the flask to Sonny and patted the mundane soldier on the shoulder. "Sure, Gere, sure. It's just a corrupted Titan. Let's kill it. Why not?" Sonny received the flask and took a sip of something bitter, flavorful and absolutely searing. He grimaced and coughed, feeling his eyes turn wet with tears. Gods, what the hell are they drinking? After a while, when he regained his ability to speak again, Sonny wiped his eyes and passed the flask to Karen. Feeling a pleasant warmth spread through his body, he said, "Yeah, you're right. It's just a corrupted Titan." Chapter 1056. The Fall of Falcon Scott, 74. It was already morning by the time Sonny made his way to the dormitory tower where Professor Obel was staying. The cold had gotten even more oppressive, and the wind was like a sharp knife that cut ruthlessly against his skin. It was rather strange. Soon after the news of the winter beast's inevitable attack spread through the city, the whole population seemed to have gone mad. Fear, panic, and desperation were like a wildfire that spread through the siege capital, throwing it into utter chaos. For a while, it was as though Falcon Scott had turned into a wounded, frenzied beast. But now, a strange calmness permeated the snow-covered streets. Even near the port, the mob had become meek and docile. A few more ships arrived, and a few more millions of people were taken away. The rest either surrendered themselves to fate or gave up completely. As soon as they let go of hope, their fear disappeared, Their panic subsided too. As Sonny walked through the city, he saw different people coping with the merciless reality of the situation in different ways. Some seemed numb and lethargic, some seemed serene and at peace. Everyone found solace in their own way. He even saw groups of people climb to the roofs of the highest buildings, carrying chairs, portable heaters, and food. They were going to watch the arrival of the Titan and meet their ends together. Others were trying to get as deep underground as they could. A siege capital like Falcon Scott had plenty of durable subterranean shelters. However, if anyone thought that they could hide from the approaching doom there, they were sorely mistaken. No amount of frozen soil and layers of mundane defenses were going to stop a corrupted Titan. There had been shelters in Erebus Field too, but no one who had entered them survived, and Goliath was in no way a match for the winter beast. As for Sonny himself, he had not given up yet. He still had some will to fight left in him. He had spent these hours trying to come up with a way to, if not defeat the abominable horror, then at least tie down and stall it. Sadly, Sonny saw no way to win, no matter how hard he looked. The enemy was just too strong, and his bag of tricks was all but empty. There was no time to prepare anything, and even if there were, he was not sure that he would have been able to pull another miracle out of thin air. Killing Goliath was already an astonishing feat in the past. Before the transcendence of the first saints, it had taken all of clan valor decades to slay a fallen titan, but Sonny destroyed the dreadful stone colossus in a single second. If he had been a couple seconds slower, the city would have probably already been destroyed. That was how terrifying titans were. The further one walked on the road of ascendance or corruption, the greater the distance between individual steps. There was a vast chasm between a terror and a titan, and an even more boundless abyss between a fallen and a corrupted one. So, Sonny had not come up with a single good idea. His own strength was insufficient, and there was no one stronger around to borrow it from. Is it really hopeless? Despite it all, he was reluctant to accept that fact. And yet, a shadow of doubt was weighing on his heart. As Sonny was approaching the dormitory tower, his thoughts wandered to Gear and Karen. His mood turned dark as he remembered all the people he had brought to Falcon Scott, and how much effort had gone into preserving their lives. Where were they now? The nameless sleeper, the kid who had called him uncle once, the brave soldier who had lost his arm to the devouring cloud. Had they been evacuated? Or were they still out there, somewhere, within the doomed city? Most of the 200 million people had already been evacuated, so the chances of that weren't high. Standing in front of the entrance to the dormitory, he looked at the piles of snow on both sides of it. The man who had been so happy to give him a sandwich, were he and his wife safe? And countless others. With a deep sigh, Sonny entered the tower and made his way to Professor Obel's apartment. The old man met him with a calm smile. "Master Sunless, come in, come in." By now there was no one inside the apartment except for the old man. The two of them remained silent for a while. Eventually, Professor Obel sighed. "I wanted to thank you. Some time ago, I made a request of you to not choose to save my life over someone else's. Back then you didn't agree. I'm glad that you changed your mind." Sonny looked at the old man with a bleak expression. He remembered that conversation. Back then he had foolishly proclaimed that he would not have to choose because he would simply save everyone he decided to save. Technically, Sonny had kept that promise. The convoy had made it to Falcon Scott, and although there were some casualties, he never ended up having to put Professor Obel's life over that of other people. Who could have known that their woes would only grow more calamitous after reaching the distant siege capital? Sonny pursed his lips, and then said in an even tone, "I am not going to lie, Professor. I am unhappy with your decision. After all the effort I've put into keeping you alive, you still chose to stay. It makes me feel as though all those struggles of mine were meaningless." They had not been, of course. Tens of thousands of people, and maybe even millions, were alive because of what Sonny had done. But millions of people were faceless. To him, Professor Obel had long become somewhat of a personification of all the mundane humans the First Army was meant to save. Him and Beth. The old man smiled wistfully. "I knew that you would feel that way. People who are as principled as you, young man, are a rare breed. They can't help but feel responsible for the entire world. However, the world is too vast, Major Sunless. You can't defeat it all by yourself. And you shouldn't be forced to either. Sunny looked at him with surprise. Now that is amusing. He couldn't help but snort. Principled me? Professor, you are deeply mistaken. I have no principles to speak of. I am just stubborn, spiteful, and a little bit mad. That's all there is to me. The old man laughed. If you say so, young man, anyway, you must be really busy. I won't keep you. However, I do have one last favor to ask. Would you mind escorting me to the communication array? My work schedule is technically suspended, but a bunch of us old engineers decided to gather there. Who knows, maybe we'll even manage to restore function to the whole thing. In any case, it will be an extremely interesting problem to solve. I already have a few ideas. Sunny stared at him for a few moments, then silently nodded. Together, they left the dormitory tower and ventured through the streets of Falcon Scott, chatting idly as they did. Time seemed to slow down a little. Nevertheless, they eventually reached the base of the communication array complex, where a dozen or so old men and women were standing, waiting for the latecomers to arrive. Some of them waved to Professor Obel, calling out to him with boisterous voices. The old man waved in response, then turned to Sunny and smiled. We're here. Thank you very much, young man, for everything. Sunny felt as though a lump was stuck in his throat. He lingered for a few moments, then forced out a few words. Don't mention it. And thank you too, Professor. Please stay safe. Professor Obel patted him on the shoulder. You must survive, Major. Don't hesitate to save yourself when the time comes. Farewell. With that, he smiled one last time, then turned away and headed to the other old engineers. They welcomed him with friendly greetings. Sunny remained motionless for a while, then turned away too. Damnation. Gritting his teeth, he shivered in the cold and started walking. The shadow weighing on his heart had become heavier. He found his soldiers calmly preparing for the nearing, and most likely their last battle. Sunny had chosen the members of his cohort based on their mental resilience, but even still, he was surprised and slightly disturbed by how nonchalant all three seemed. Samara had lost her rifle, but was now in possession of Kim's carbine. She was sitting on an alloy crate, silently charging one bullet after another with essence. Bell was sharpening his sword with a vague smile on his face. Memories did not need to be sharpened, but the swordsman had a habit of doing so anyway. Dorn had been wounded by the scavenger. The deep cut on his chest had already been dealt with by an awakened healer, but he was yet to fully recover. The giant man was moving his shoulder through a set of stretching exercises, wincing from time to time. His sledgehammer was nearby, its handle leaning against the wall. When Sunny entered, the three awakened glanced his way and saluted. "What's the news, sir?" He shook his head. "No news yet. If we're lucky, the bastard will show up tomorrow. If we're not, it will be here today." Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then added, "In any case, we will have to deal with the blizzard first. Keep those charms I gave you summoned. Protection against cold is going to play a big role when the winter beast comes." Sunny possessed the memory of ice, but he had also created lesser versions of the ascended charm for each of his soldiers. Those memories were not as potent, but also required much less essence to sustain the enchantments. They nodded, summoning the artificial charms. Looking at his soldiers, Sunny couldn't help but feel a hint of fear. He had only known these people for a few months, but they had gone through a lifetime of struggles together. Even if he wasn't responsible for their lives, he would still have been fiercely reluctant to see them die. Bell, Dorn, Samara, they were admirable warriors each. More importantly, they were his people. Sunny sighed. You just had to go and stay, huh? He had been fully prepared to have Nave load the whole cohort on the ship, but the three awakened silently refused. Staying in Falcon Scott was their choice. Bell looked at him and grinned. Sure, sir, that's our job. Samara simply nodded, choosing not to say anything in her usual manner. Dorn chuckled. We did, but aren't you here too, Major? Sunny winced. Of course it wasn't the same. He was an ascended, and one ridiculously hard to kill on top of that. His soldiers, however, were merely awakened. They were not nearly as resilient. Yeah, I am. Bell put his sword away, the smile slowly disappearing from his face. The swordsman remained silent for a few moments, looking at him with an uncharacteristically serious expression. A heavy atmosphere settled in the barracks room. Eventually he said, "There is something I wanted to ask you, though, sir. You don't have to answer, of course." Sonny frowned. "What is it?" Bell hesitated for a bit, then asked thoughtfully, "There are rumors going around that you're dating Mongrel. But Mongrel, she is your echo. What's that all about?" Sonny stared at him, speechless. "What the hell are you on about, fool? I'm not dating anyone." The swordsman suddenly threw his head back and exploded with laughter. "I see. I see." Dorn gave him a disapproving look and let out an exasperated sigh. "That guy." Sonny shook his head, suddenly feeling an urge to laugh too. "He's crazier than me. Gods. If you're done, Bell, let's discuss strategy." Sometime later, Sonny walked outside to get some fresh air. The air was much cleaner in Antarctica, after all. It would be a waste to remain inside all the time, even despite the cold. As Sonny stared at the distant sky, he suddenly noticed a black bird looking at him from a nearby roof. Then, he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. "Sonny, there you are." Master Jet appeared from behind a corner and walked over to him. Then stopped, her icy blue eyes full of coldness that was even more chilling than the polar night. He looked at her, then smiled. "Here I am," she sighed. "I sent all the information we have about the winter beast to your communicator. Did you read it?" He nodded. Sadly, there was little known about the Titan and its abilities. Even though St. Tyrus had spent months suppressing the creature, most of their drawn-out battle had not been a direct one. The winter beast had shown an eerie ability to control cold, snow, and wind. Since Skytide commanded the winds as well, their battlefield had been the sky above the Antarctic center itself. It was precisely because the Titan's most dreadful power had been continuously countered by St. Tyrus that no one knew its true extent. It had to be tremendous, though, considering that the mere presence of the creature was distorting communications across the entire region. All Sonny and Jet could do was make educated guesses. She hesitated. "Good then." After that, both fell silent. Sonny looked at Soul Reaper, remembering the past. She was the first person he had met after surviving the first nightmare back then. Jet looked like an unreachable goddess to him. Seeing her cold beauty, he had been stunned. Luckily, she promptly slapped some sense back into him. After that, Master Jet was always in the background of his life, arguably saving it on more than one occasion with her advice and slightly jaded wisdom. And now, they were equals. It was funny the two of them had only met a few years ago, but Sonny felt as though he had known Jet all his life. Maybe because those years felt like several lifetimes. He sighed, then suddenly asked, "Master Jet, I've always wanted to ask, why did you really join the government? Considering your abilities and character, the legacy clans probably showered you with offers, and incredible ones, at that. Hell, you must have received a special strategic asset designation as well." They had briefly talked about it in the past, but Sonny always felt that he did not know the full truth. Soul Reaper looked at him with a surprised expression. "What? Where did this come from?" he chuckled. "Just curious, that's all." Jet remained silent for a bit, then scoffed. "Well, all right, but you are really overestimating me. A special strategic asset. I wasn't even designated as a simple strategic asset. Sure, my aspect was a dangerous and unique one, but other than that I was completely unremarkable. I was foolish, timid, and unsure of myself, too. It was only later, much later after being beaten by life over and over again, that I got rid of some of my foolishness and bloomed into this awesome and incomparably majestic figure you see in front of yourself today. Satisfied?" Sonny smiled. "I guess." After a few moments of silence, he asked, "Do you regret it, though, the path that you took?" She looked away, a thoughtful expression appearing on her face. Master Jet pondered his question for a bit, then shrugged. Her voice was calm. "Ours is a bitter life, Sonny. From the outskirts of NQSC to here, it has often been bitter, and only rarely sweet. A life like that, it would be a waste, to make it taste more bitter still with regret. So no, I might be unsatisfied with many things, but I would never waste my time on regret. Jet looked at him and raised a brow. Why? Are you feeling regretful about something? Sunny laughed. Honestly, right now, I am regretting pretty much every single decision I've made in my life. She stared at him blankly, then rolled her eyes. Well, get over it. We have a titan to fight. And so they did. The temperature continued to plunge, and the winds grew more and more frenzied, howling through the streets of the siege capital like hungry wolves, faster than everyone had hoped. Only a few short hours later, the winter beast had reached Falcon Scott. Chapter 1058. The Fall of Falcon Scott, 76. The remains of the field army sent to the Antarctic Center gathered into a formation after marching across the giant crater. The hill-like stone corpse of the fallen Titan Goliath, the pit created by the enormous explosion, and the city with millions of defenseless humans sheltering inside were now behind them. In front of them were a vast field of snow and the towering peaks of the mountains. There were around 20,000 mundane soldiers, some of them piloting the mighty war platforms, and 1,000 or so awakened gathered in front of the crater. Just like Gear had said, very few members of the First Army had used the priority right to be evacuated ahead of civilians. Most had remained and were now preparing to face a dreadful foe. The Winter Beast. The plan of the battle was rather simple. The creature's physical body was rumored to be hidden at the heart of the blizzard, protected by hurricane winds and murderous cold. To prevent it from reaching the siege capital, the army was going to advance into the snowstorm and confront the Titan. Neither mundane soldiers nor the awakened had any hope of actually damaging a corrupted nightmare creature. Luckily, an abomination that mostly relied on unnatural powers to kill its prey could not be too formidable in a physical confrontation. The few masters who still remained with the army had a good chance of wounding or even slaying it if they could get close enough. The role of the soldiers and the awakened was to bury the Titan under their bodies and distract it, hopefully giving the Ascended an opportunity to strike. No one knew if the plan had even a theoretical chance of working, but it was their best chance. Aside from Sunny and Jet, there were two more masters who had both survived the previous weeks of the siege and chosen to stay and fight. The four of them were spread across the formation, each commanding one of the 4 brigades. Nightmare was still slumbering because of the wounds he had received during the previous battle, but Saint, maybe due to the mantle of darkness, had already recovered. However, Sunny did not summon her yet. He wanted to keep his strongest weapon at hand in case things went wrong. If the army was unsuccessful in their desperate gamble to breach the wall of the blizzard, he would send one of his shadows ahead to allow the taciturn knight to emerge from it near the Titan and engage the abomination in battle. That was his last resort. Even still, Sunny did not know if Saint would be able to do anything. That was the main problem. None of them knew anything for sure. The Winter Beast was just too unknown and mysterious. Chances were, every single one of them would die long before catching a glimpse of the Titan's true body. Curse that fiend. Sunny was standing in front of the brigade of grim-faced soldiers who were now under his nominal command. The members of his cohort were right behind him, and behind them were the rest of the awakened. The mundane soldiers were at the back of the column, comprising most of it. All of them were looking ahead, struggling against the cruel winds. In front of them, a cloud of snow was descending from the mountains, slowly blotting out the sky. It was like a swirling white wall was slowly erasing the world. With each second, the winds were growing stronger, and the terrible cold was becoming more unbearable. The blizzard was coming. Sunny sighed, then looked over his shoulder. Get ready. Without Kim, the members of his cohort lost the ability to borrow his sight. Each of them had summoned a luminous memory, and so had the rest of the awakened in the brigade. The mundane soldiers, too, were equipped with various light-producing devices. Beams of powerful spotlights shot into the darkness from the shoulders of the towering MWPs. The brigade appeared like a river of light in the middle of a sea of darkness. The harrowing snowstorm was getting closer and closer. Advance. Sunny took the first step forward, and the soldiers followed. The war platforms prepared their flamethrowers, since the Titan's most fearsome weapon was cold. Today, these armaments were more valuable for their ability to create heat, not for their destructive potential. On both sides of the brigade, 2 more rivers of light flowed forward, one commanded by Soul Reaper Jet, one by an Ascended that Sunny had met a few times, but did not really know. A few moments later, the snow was upon them. Sunny shivered, feeling a merciless chill permeate his body. Even with his elemental resistance and the help of the memory of ice, he was shocked by how ferocious the cold was. He could only imagine how terrible it was for the rest of the soldiers. It had never been the same the previous times Sunny encountered the wandering blizzard. Now that St. Tyrus was not suppressing the winter beast, it had fully unleashed its power, causing the world itself to become its tool. This snowstorm was not an after effect of the Titan's presence on the landmass either. It was directly created by the frozen horror. In fact, the snowstorm itself was the horror. It was as much a part of the winter beast as the physical body hidden in the heart of the blizzard was. In that regard, the corrupted Titan was much closer to the dark sea of the forgotten shore than it was to a simpler creature like Goliath. For a moment, Sunny wondered if there was something hidden at the heart of the cursed sea as well. Flamethrowers. The MWPs walking at the sides of the column extended their arms, sending long streams of fire crisscrossing above the formation. It was as though a flaming cage was created around the brigade. For a few moments, the cold receded slightly. The billowing clouds of snow were instantly melted, and drops of water rained down on the shivering humans. For as long as the war platforms had fuel to keep the flames burning, the army still had a chance to reach the depths of the unnatural snowstorm. However, they had not burned for long. Chapter 1059, The Fall of Falcon Scott, 77. It was all a gamble, a dire, dangerous, deadly gamble. The soldiers of the First Army were betting their lives against the winter beast without even knowing if they would be able to reach it, let alone hurt it. They might have made that gamble out of desperation, but they had also made it out of necessity. All of them had received a chance to leave, and all of them turned it down. Some had done it due to their sense of duty or camaraderie or misguided bravery. Some had simply grown numb to the horrors of the war. As for Sunny himself, he was not really sure what had led him here. He had come to this broken land in search of power, but that desirous quest seemed so childish now. Antarctica had put a lot of things in perspective, however. This shift of perspective only made things less clear instead of revealing the truth. All he knew was that he felt fiercely reluctant to leave the job unfinished, and that he did not want to fail the soldiers who had entrusted him with their lives. Sunny had never wanted to be in charge of anyone, but now that he was, their hopes and desires weighed on him like chains. Strangely, though, he did not want to refuse that burden. He felt quite protective of it. Maybe that was what Master Jet had meant when she said that no one was free in this world. Regardless of the reason, Sunny felt a frantic hope burning in his chest as he marched into the blizzard. Come on, we can do it. Behind him, the column of shivering soldiers stubbornly moved forward inside a cage of flames. The infantrymen were all encased in suits of powered armor, which were all hermetic and insulated, capable of withstanding the most hazardous environments. The awakened were all much tougher, and many of them possessed protective memories on top of that. And yet, they were all suffering from the terrifying cold. It was just too insidious, finding a way to pass through all forms of defense. Even Sunny felt miserable because of the snowstorm. Much worse, the cold was getting worse and worse the deeper into the blizzard they walked. They had to find the true body of the winter beast soon. That cold, there's something wrong about it. It doesn't feel like a natural force. Even his thoughts felt slow and frigid. But there was no way back for them now. All that Sunny could do was march forward and endure, hoping that he and his soldiers would be able to reach the heart of the blizzard. The fire produced by the MWPs helped alleviate the cold to a certain extent. But then, slowly, the heat of the furious flames started to feel less and less substantial. The flamethrowers were still spouting long streams of burning fuel, but it was as though the fire itself had been robbed of its warmth. How could fire be cold? Sunny did not know, but he felt as though the flames now contained no heat whatsoever. They were like predators that had lost all their teeth. Curse it. He glanced back, seeing a few of the mundane soldiers staggering as they walked, then gritted his teeth and continued to move forward. The snowstorm could not be too vast. They had to be getting closer to its center. All they had to do was endure a little longer. Suppressing a hint of fear, Sonny sent his shadows to scout ahead. As soon as his body lost their support, the cold assaulted it with renewed strength. He cursed quietly and concentrated on resisting the furious blows of the hurricane winds. Behind him, the awakened and the mundane soldiers were shielding their faces and leaning forward to withstand the force of the storm. Even the towering war platforms were struggling to keep their balance. They had great mass, but also a much larger surface for the wind to attack. The pilots controlled their lumbering machines with intricate skill, keeping them upright and moving forward. The shadows flew into the storm. Even though it was almost impossible to see through the raging snow, they had other ways to perceive the world. Sonny hoped that at least one of them would be able to discover the true body of the winter beast. After all, searching for it was not hard. All he had to do was follow to where the cold was most dreadful. The closer one got to the heart of the blizzard, the more terrible the unnatural cold would become. And indeed, his shadows were able to discover the right direction soon. They all failed to reach the eye of the storm, though. Sonny felt a little shaken when he realized that, further into the blizzard, even the shadows started suffering from the merciless cold. It made no sense, since shadows were incorporeal beings, but it was nevertheless true. Once they flew sufficiently deep into the snowstorm, the power of the winter beast seemed to transcend logic and reason. It was capable of freezing even those things that should have been incapable of being frozen. How can it? To his horror, Sonny realized that the frigid slowness of his thoughts was also not just in his imagination. If the corrupted Titan was capable of affecting shadows with its powers, why wouldn't it be able to affect minds? Nothing within the winter beast's snowy domain could avoid being pervaded by its power. Recalling the shadows, Sonny shuddered and continued to walk in the direction they had discovered. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. Behind him, a soldier fell to the ground. Others tried to help the soldier stand up, but it was of no use. The man was not moving. His comrades had no choice but to abandon their futile attempts. The column flowed past the motionless figure, and soon it was swallowed by the haze of the blizzard, disappearing from view. Not long after that, someone else dropped down. Sonny felt dread settle in his heart. No, we need to keep going. I refuse to give up. I refuse to believe that the abomination's power cannot be broken. He continued to walk with an ugly expression on his face, leaning low to resist the shattering wind. Soon, more people fell into the snow. Sonny could feel their shadows turn lifeless in the distance. Every death cut him like a knife. It was only the mundane soldiers at first. Then one of the MWPs staggered and froze, depowering a moment later. A powerful squall crashed into it, making the towering machine sway and collapse. Eventually, even the weakest of the awakened started dying. And then the strongest of them. Engrossed by grim fearlessness and dogged determination, the brigade continued to struggle forward. The other brigades were advancing into the blizzard by its side, too. However, their rate of progress was becoming slower and slower. The closer they got to the heart of the snowstorm, the more murderous the cold became, the stronger the winds grew, and the harder it was to make even a single step forward. It felt as though an irresistible force was pushing Sonny back, and at the same time trying to sap him of his very life, battering his body with blades of wind and ice. Damn it. At first, a soldier or two would fall every minute. Then, a new body would fall into the embrace of the snow almost every second. Sonny felt a vast, maddening anguish, and a deep, biting reluctance, and fear. Not for himself, but for the mission. But then, he became scared for himself, too. At some point, Sonny realized that because of the diabolical cold that permeated his mind, he could no longer feel his dream realm anchor. It still existed there somewhere, but it was as though the mystical connection was distorted by a hazy wall of snow. Sonny could not sense the anchor, and could not reach for it. He had nowhere to run, just like the rest of his soldiers. Are we going to lose just like that? The thought filled him with indescribable anger and grief. He could tell that they were getting closer to the heart of the blizzard. They were not too far away, now. But the snowstorm had become just too calamitous. Sonny had lost count of how many soldiers he had lost. In fact, his senses, even the shadow sense, were slowly failing him. He could not see too far, and he could not perceive too far. The world had narrowed down to a hazy sphere of a dozen meters, while everything else was obscured by snow. In that sphere there were only a few awakened. As far as he knew, everyone else might have already succumbed to the ruthless cold. Gods, it can't be like this. It can't be, damn it. In his heart, Sonny would have been able to accept if they had reached the true body of the winter beast, but failed to defeat it. But the idea of being wiped out, without even making it to the eye of the storm, was enough to drive him insane. Damn it, damn it, damn it all. But in the end, that was exactly what happened. Eventually, still surrounded by the wall of howling snow, Sonny realized that he could hardly make even a single step forward. He had lost sight of the brigade and did not know if any of his soldiers were still alive. There were only 3 awakened beside him, Belle, Dorn, and Samara. And with each second, still, the cold was growing more harrowing. He closed his eyes. Admit it. Sonny hesitated, staring into the blizzard. Admit it, you lost. He shivered. You fool, what else did you expect would happen? It was almost as if the sin of solace was talking to him, but no. Those were only his own thoughts. He had not even summoned the jade sword yet. His own thoughts were much more damning. Sonny let out a soft sigh, then turned around and looked at his soldiers. The members of his cohort were standing close to each other, bits of ice covering their hair. Their luminous memories had grown dim and weak, and their lips were blue. Their eyes, however, were much more calm than his own. Sonny studied their faces for a few moments, trying to come up with a solid thought. Eventually, he simply whispered, "I'm sorry." Bell smiled with the corner of his mouth, then slightly shook his head. That action alone seemed to take something out of him, and the swordsman swayed slightly. Samara reached out to support him, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, gripping it tightly. Dorn struggled a little and turned to face them. He gave his fellow awakened a warm nod, then kept looking at them without saying anything. Maybe he couldn't. Sonny remained motionless, watching. He watched them slowly grow still. And then he watched as the spark of life was gradually extinguished inside them. Samara was first, and then Dorn. Bell was the last to go. Only when their shadows had turned lifeless and empty did Sonny allow himself to dissipate into the darkness, escaping the murderous cold. In the embrace of the shadows, the power of the winter beast was not nearly as overwhelming. It could still reach here somehow, but in a weakened state. Sonny howled with sorrow and fury as he flew deeper into the blizzard. Even if everything was lost, he still wanted to try and reach the wretched abomination. He wanted to hurt, break, and kill it. But he failed. Even if the cold was not as terrifying in the shadows, it was still there, and the closer Sonny got to the heart of the blizzard, the more annihilating the cold became. He still persisted forward, feeling his very soul freeze and start to grow still, dying for a time. He almost made it. Eventually, though, Sonny had to turn back. He ran away. He ran away and hid himself, waiting for the snowstorm to pass. He survived. Chapter 101 through 60. The Fall of Falcon Scott, 78. The winter beast came. And then it left. The last citadel of humanity in the Antarctic Center, Falcon Scott, had fallen to the chain of nightmares. The harrowing blizzard had swept through it, freezing the whole city solid and killing everyone inside. Sonny had heard that a long time ago during the dark times, or maybe even before that. The whole of Antarctica was covered by ice. It had been a land of perpetual winter, cold, and snow. After the corrupted Titan wiped out the last human settlement and retreated back into the mountains, as if satisfied to be the sole sovereign of the region, the landscape looked just like that, again. The city was drowning in snow. The buildings emerged from it, encased in ice. Below the cliffs, a large swath of the ocean was frozen as well. A gargantuan battleship was stuck in the ice, still anchored, the people aboard it all dead. Everyone was dead, except for Sonny. His soldiers were dead. Millions of civilians were dead. Professor Obel was dead too, but he was alive, and not even wounded. Sonny had remained in the shadows for a long time, only emerging from them after his essence almost ran dry. And now, he was digging a grave. The earth itself was frozen solid, so his task was not an easy one. He had to summon the sin of solace and use the beautiful jade blade to dig. Sunny was standing in a shallow pit, deepening it. His movements were fast and purposeful. Angry tears were streaming down his face, turning into ice before falling to the ground. He was not alone either. A vague shape that looked a lot like him was sitting on the edge of the pit, staring at him somberly. It had his voice, too. "Look at you go." Sunny gritted his teeth, ignoring the sin of solace. The cursed sword remained silent for a while, observing him. Eventually it asked, "So, did you find it? Conviction? Or whatever it was you've been searching for?" Sunny spared the vague shape a glance, then continued digging. No, I didn't find crap." He wiped his face with an elbow. "Actually, that's not true. I did find something. I found out that I was right all along." Sunny plunged the sword into the frozen soil and laughed. Faith, calling, conviction, all those lofty words. It's all rubbish. It's all meaningless. People like Anvil of Valor and Key Song have conviction, and that conviction helps them achieve greatness. Well, where are they? What good did it do? Where the hell were they, huh? He lowered the sword and stared at the vague shape with fury in his eyes. Those great people go around playing with their great conviction, while little people like us suffer and lose our little lives. But what's wrong with having small dreams? All I ever wanted was to live a good life and keep people I care about safe. What's wrong about that? Why do I have to have a great goal and soaring ambition to be allowed to exist? Sunny remained motionless for a moment, then returned to digging. I'll tell you why. It's because those bastards made it so that's the world they have built. They can pursue their convictions and trample on millions in the process. Because there's no one to hold them responsible. They can have their little wars while ignoring the death toll, no matter how much people die. Hate it. I hate it. Suddenly he stopped, and then let out a small laugh. Effie, she was wrong. Well, I can't blame her, she doesn't know Nephis as well as I do. From the outside, it might really look like Neph draws power from conviction, and she does too. But the truth is so much simpler. I mean, she told me herself. Back on the Forgotten Shore, years ago, Sunny had asked Nephis why she wanted to destroy the spell, and her answer was very simple indeed. Because I hate it. Because she hated it. She was going to destroy the spell because she wanted to, and she wanted to destroy the spell because she hated it. That was all. Sunny laughed again, then shook his head. Fool. I'm such a fool. The vague shape sitting on the edge of the grave grinned. Well, at least we agree on something. Sunny continued to dig, thinking back on the past months. He had not found conviction. But in a sense, he also did. I don't need it. I know what I value, and I know what I want. It might not be much, but it's enough. I am who I am, and who I am is enough. It's plenty. He looked at the vague shape and made it disappear with a thought. Then, Sunny climbed out of the grave and looked at it. There were 3 graves beside that one. They all stared at Sunny like monuments to his failure. Slowly, he turned to the 4 corpses that lay on the ground a small distance away from the graves. After the winter beast left, he had returned to collect the bodies of Belle, Dorn, and Samara. And then, not too far away, he had found the body of Master Jet as well. Master Jet Sunny couldn't quite comprehend the fact that she was dead. She had always been there for him. She had been the first person to meet him after the first nightmare, and the one to guide him to the academy. She had been there when he returned from the Forgotten Shore, and from the Kingdom of Hope too. She had even helped him purchase his home. Soul Reaper had been his mentor, comrade and friend. For him, she was synonymous with competence and power, and perseverance. If a girl from the outskirts could rise so high, then why couldn't he? And now, she was dead. Sunny couldn't believe it, but there was no denying it. Her lifeless body was right there in front of him, unmoving and still. Her beautiful blue eyes were now glassy and hollow. Her lips were never going to curve into a smile again. Soul Reaper Jet was gone. Sunny's heart was empty. Right. He remained motionless for a while, then walked over to Belle and carried him to the first grave. Then, silently, he repeated the same process with Samara and Dorn. Master Jet was the last, but he couldn't bring himself to approach her body for a long time. Eventually, though, it had to be done. Feeling as though he was dead himself, Sonny approached Jet's corpse, then leaned down to grab it. The corpse stared at him with glassy eyes and said hoarsely, "Kindly unhand me." Sonny sighed. "Don't worry, Master Jet. I am going to bury you well. There are no nightmare creatures around yet, but they will come eventually. You wouldn't want to be eaten, would you? I surely don't." The corpse remained silent for a few moments. "Have you lost your mind, Sonny? Put me the hell down." He nodded. Yes, I did lose my mind a little. That's true." The corpse of Soul Reaper Jet continued to stare at him. I should probably close her eyes. "Do you need me to slap you again? Snap out of it, damn it." A small frown appeared on Sonny's face. Then, he suddenly dropped the corpse and flinched back, falling on his butt. "What? What? Master Jet, you're alive?" The corpse remained motionless on the ground. After a short pause, it said in a dull, hoarse, corpsely voice, "No, I am dead." Sonny stared at it, dumbfounded. Suddenly the corpse let out a grating, hissing sound. It was trying to laugh. "I've been dead this whole time. It's my flaw you are dead. But as long as I keep killing things and absorbing their essence, I can at least maintain a semblance of life. If I don't, I'll be truly destroyed." She struggled to turn her head and looked at him with dead, glassy eyes. "That was the real reason I joined the government, all those years ago. I knew that I'd always have things to kill if I did. Now, Sonny Arg, damn it, can you help me sit up?" He slowly rose to his feet, took a few shaky steps forward, and pulled her up to a sitting position. Then, he blinked a couple of times and said, "So that was why you told me that it's impossible for you to die in Antarctica? Because you were never alive to begin with?" Soul Reaper struggled for a few moments, and then took a labored breath, the first one since he had found her in the snowfield outside the city. Yes, it was a figure of speech. Both of them remained quiet for a while, not knowing what to say. Then, Jet suddenly turned her head. Her eyes glistened a little. "Sonny, look there." He turned around, not knowing what she wanted him to see. Nothing seemed to have changed. The graves, the snow, the frozen buildings of the destroyed city were all the same. However far away, a thin line of pale lilac appeared above the horizon, breaking the rain of cold darkness. Soul Reaper tried to smile, but failed. The sun is rising. The night, it's over. Chapter 1061, Dire Strait. "Sonny, come here. I'll only kill you a little." "Get the hell away from me, you demented zombie." Sonny took a few steps back, easily avoiding the grasp of the shambling corpse of Master Jet. Fortunately, she was not too fast. In fact, she could barely crawl. Her nails powerlessly scratched against the alloy, and Soul Reaper let out a hoarse, disappointed hiss. "Damn it." Sonny shook his head. Despite Jet's weakened state, avoiding her clutches was a tiresome task, mostly because there was nowhere really for him to run. Currently, the two of them were trapped on an alloy raft that was drifting slowly across the strait between the Antarctic center and the vast landmass to the east. When Jet lost control of herself, all Sonny could do was endlessly circle the raft and wait for her to come to her senses. "Come here, Sonny. I won't bite." He gave her a dark look, then picked up his chair, walked over to the other end of their improvised vessel, and calmly sat down. The length of the raft was no more than 10 meters, but for Soul Reaper that was a vast distance right now. She stared at him for a while, then gave up and rolled on her back with a curse, looking at the sky with a resigned expression. When Jet remained still, she really looked like a corpse. And technically she was, but at least in this cold she was not a rotting corpse. One had to count their blessings. Unlike the souls of all awakened, hers was not able to generate essence on its own. Worse than that, her soul core was shattered and constantly leaked what little essence she had left. Once the essence completely ran out, Soul Reaper would truly and forever perish. The only way for her to survive was to continuously kill living beings and absorb their soul essence. That was actually Jet's sleeper ability. Her awakened ability allowed her to bypass all forms of physical defense and strike directly at the souls of her enemies, which was where her fearsome nickname, Soul Reaper, had come from. Her ascended ability was to slowly absorb shards of broken soul cores from those she had killed to build up and strengthen her own, both in terms of size and capacity. It also removed the natural limit of essence infusion that the flesh of most living beings had, allowing Jet to oversaturate her body with essence and achieve truly superb levels of strength, speed, and resilience. Hers was a supreme aspect. Sadly, right now, Jet had no essence to spare on strengthening her body. She barely had enough to keep it from collapsing entirely, and even that last reserve was slowly running out. Things had not gone well for them after the destruction of Falcon Scott. Even after the winter beast retreated into the depths of the Antarctic Center, its dire influence remained. Neither Sunny nor Jet had been able to access their dream realm anchors, which meant that they could not escape from the waking world. Eventually, the two of them had been left with only one choice: to try and brave the strait. Actually, there was no need for them to even reach East Antarctica. All they had to do was sail far enough into the ocean to leave the area of influence of the corrupted Titan, which would allow both to return to the dream realm. That would still be dangerous, but not as dangerous as remaining in the winter beast's frozen realm. There were no ships coming, and no seaworthy vessels left intact in Falcon Scott. In the end, Sunny had been forced to improvise. The alloy raft they were currently drifting on was not just a random sheet of light alloy. It was actually the covetous coffer. That memory of his possessed an enchantment called mendacious coffer, which allowed it to mimic the forms of inanimate objects. Additionally, the size and intricacy of the simulacrum were dependent on Sunny's shadow core capacity. By now he was very close to becoming an ascended tyrant, so obviously, that capacity was much greater than when he had first acquired the coffer. So, Sunny had turned it into a raft. It was much larger than the alloy chest the coffer usually looked like, at the expense of the complexity. Even better, the locomotive chiffonier enchantment allowed the raft to propel itself forward at a modest speed. Most importantly, though, the covetous coffer was an ascended memory of the fourth tier, and as such it was tremendously more durable than even the strongest alloy would have been. If something attacked them from below, which had already happened a few times, the raft was not going to be destroyed unless the attacking nightmare creature happened to be truly terrifying. Sunny and Jet had ventured into the strait on top of the covetous coffer, hoping to leave the winter beast's area of influence in about a day, and they had. Sadly, their situation did not really improve after that. As it turned out, there were numerous nightmare gates hidden below the cold waters of the ocean here. Perhaps there were too many, or perhaps their luck had just been truly atrocious, but even now, a week later, Sunny and Jet had yet to encounter a place where the call of nightmare would not instantly whisk them away if they tried to leave for the dream realm. At this point, it would be easier for them to actually reach East Antarctica. They had made it 2/3 of the way already. The mighty battleships of the government fleet were able to make the trip in a day or two, but the covetous coffer was much slower, so it was going to take them a few more days to make landfall. Sunny did not feel too much pressure. Saint was standing guard with Morgan's warbow in her hands, warding off most of the sea creatures. Sunny and Saint were capable of dealing with almost every normal threat. If something they could not deal with were to attack from the depths, he could use a combination of memories to take flight. If they were attacked in the skies, he could dive deep into the ocean. The only problem he had was that Jet would periodically lose her mind and half-heartedly try to kill him. Sitting in his luxurious chair, Sunny threw a look at Soul Reaper's unmoving corpse and sighed. Damnation. Chapter 1062, Gone Fishing. Sunny was not too worried about being able to reach East Antarctica. Unless something truly harrowing rose from the depths of the ocean to devour them, he was certain of his ability to either kill or escape it. However, he was worried about Jet. A week ago, she had been weak, but not nearly as weak as she was now. Her mental state was also getting worse. He knew that Soul Reaper had been intentionally starving her body of essence in order to conserve as much of it as possible, but still, Sunny did not know how much longer she would last. Right now, she was not even able to afford summoning a memory. Every drop of essence counted, and there was very little of it left in her shattered soul core, which presented a problem. Saint was capable of killing most nightmare creatures that attacked them with her bow, and Sunny was not far behind her in terms of lethality. However, Jet was in no condition to kill anything. But despite that, as he considered his options, the corpse stirred, then started laboriously crawling in his direction again, demented lights burning in its glassy blue eyes. "Come here. Come here." Sonny stared at her with distaste, then shook his head and stood up. His shadow sense spread outward, encompassing as much of the world as he could perceive. He remained motionless for a while, allowing the corpse to draw dangerously close. Jet's hollow eyes glinted. "Got you." Before she could grab his shin, however, Sonny sighed and dove off the edge of the raft, disappearing under the cold water. The graceless dusk dissipated into dancing threads of black silk. Jet seemed startled by his disappearance. She fruitlessly clawed at the surface of the raft a couple of times, then grew still. "He's gone." A hoarse sigh escaped from her bluish lips. She didn't inhale after that. By now, even breathing was a chore. She didn't really need to anyway. The corpse remained motionless for a long time. Eventually, a black bird landed on the raft, hopped over to the corpse, and stared at it curiously. A few moments later, the crow tried to peck one of the glassy eyes out. Jet blinked. "You stop that, crow crow, or I'm going to make you into a soup." The bird hurriedly jumped away, seemingly nervous. "Soup, soup." Its voice sounded indignant. Soul Reaper looked at the bird silently, then rasped, "Did you find land?" The crow spread its wings and waved them a couple of times. "Land. Land." The corpse tried to smile, which looked quite disturbing. Even Saint spared it an indifferent glance. "How far is it?" The bird ruffled its feathers and made another hop back. "Far, far." Jet gritted her teeth. "I know that it's far, you stupid bird. How far?" The echo simply stared at her in confusion. After a couple of seconds, it cawed proudly. "How? How?" Soul Reaper hissed, then hit her head against the alloy surface of the raft a couple of times. God damn it. After that small outburst, she didn't say anything else, remaining still and unmoving. The raft swayed gently on the waves. Below the raft, hundreds of small metallic feet were furiously paddling the cold water. On top of it, a living statue, a talking corpse, and a small black bird were silently waiting. Sometime later, the water behind the raft suddenly boiled, and a young man with silky black hair and alabaster skin emerged from it, dragging something in a stranglehold. A terrifying creature with long tentacles that were as wide as a man's thigh was struggling furiously, trying to free itself. Its spongy flesh was awash with inky black blood. "Stop fighting, you bastard." Sonny gritted his teeth and ignored a tentacle that was wrapped around his neck, exerting enough pressure on it to crush an armored vehicle. Using one hand, he swam toward the raft, climbed aboard, and dragged the nightmare creature with him. Saint silently moved to the opposite side of the coffer so that the weight of the abomination did not make it capsize. The crow flew up and landed on her shoulder, staring at the monstrous creature with apprehension. Sonny pressed the abomination down and barked. "Stay still." He was rather angry. Yes, he and Saint were enough to slay most of the nightmare creatures that would attack them, either from underwater or from the sky. However, capturing one alive, that was a whole different level of trouble. "Jet, get over here." Soul Reaper slowly gathered her limbs and then sluggishly tried to stand up. After a few tries, she succeeded and stood there for a moment, swaying. Sonny summoned the cruel sight and tossed it to her, using his knee to press the abomination into the alloy. Soul Reaper caught the spear and used its shaft to help herself stay upright. He held the nightmare creature down and cursed. "Hurry the hell up, this thing is really strong. Not to mention that it had more limbs than he did." Immobilizing it was a miserable task. Jet shambled over, then spun the somber spear and thrust it into the center of the mass of furiously dancing tentacles, using the whole weight of her body to give the strike some force. The silver blade pierced the flesh of the abomination and disappeared inside, causing a river of black blood to flow onto the alloy surface of the raft. The corpse of Soul Reaper lost balance and fell flat into the puddle of blood. She remained laying there, not paying the convulsing tentacles any attention. Slowly, an eerie smile of satisfaction appeared on the dead body's blood-stained face. Ah, that feels better. Sunny let go of the slain creature and sent it back into the water with a furious kick. Saint moved back to the middle of the raft, balancing it with her prodigious weight. The crow slid off her shoulder and landed at the edge of the pool of black blood. It stared at it for a moment, and then cawed excitedly. Soup, soup. Chapter 1063, Lively Corpse. Sunny summoned the graceless dusk back and remained motionless for a while, looking at the dark expanse of the ocean. The sunrise in Antarctica was a long affair by now. The sky was on the precipice of falling into a long period of twilight, but the cold waters still seemed black. After a month or two of dawn, it would be day for about 4 months, followed by a couple of months of dusk. There would be much fewer shadows around for close to half a year, which meant that Sunny was going to have a much harder time fighting. Many of his advantages would disappear. Provided that the forces of humanity would even be able to last that long, of course. There was a good chance that they wouldn't, but there was also a good chance that they would. The situation in East Antarctica was much better than it had been in the Antarctic Center. In fact, it was more or less exactly what the government had hoped for after the tumultuous first phase of the operation. All the population had been relocated to a number of siege capitals, the soldiers had hunkered down, and people were being slowly carried across the ocean to the other quadrants. That process would last until the end of the year, at least. There were 3 field armies of the 1st Evacuation Army currently operating in East Antarctica, which was exactly 3 times more than the single one that had been sent to the Antarctic Center. There were also 2 saints there, one of the government's own and the emissary of the great clan Song. Once Saint Tyrus recovered from her wounds, there would be 3. The 2nd Army was on its way as well. They would be making landfall in just a few days, and once that happened, the human forces on the continent would be incredibly bolstered. The 2nd Army was supposed to be composed of twice as many mundane soldiers awakened and masters as the 1st Army had been. Close to 5,000 awakened had died in the Antarctic Center, but by the end of August, there would be 60,000 of them defending East Antarctica. Best of all, there was no winter beast to suppress all forms of long-range communications there, allowing the army to operate as the well-oiled machine it was supposed to be. That had to be enough to withstand the onslaught of the chain of nightmares for 5 more months. By then, most of the population would hopefully be evacuated, and if not, there was the winter solstice. With how rampantly the spell had been spreading in the southern quadrant, the number of awakened was bound to double or even triple after the solstice. All the sleepers created by the chain of nightmares would receive the chance to come into their full power. So, although the forces arrayed against the evacuation effort would continue to grow more dire as time went on, the forces of humanity would swiftly increase too. There was a chance. However, Sunny knew that there was one unpredictable part of the equation that could ruin everything. The great clans. Nephis had told him that the southern campaign was a perfect battlefield for them to wage their war. And so, there was a large possibility that Song and Valor would clash in East Antarctica, complicating the already dreadful situation. There was no sense or reason in their insane feud, at least none that Sunny and Neph could see. And yet, the threat posed by the War of Great Clans was very real. As Sunny looked at the ocean, his eyes glinted with cold, wrathful light. Those bastards! He had not even noticed when his hands turned into fists. Penny for your thoughts. Sunny turned slightly and looked at Jet. She had sat up and was now wiping the nightmare creature's blood off her face, looking slightly less coarsely, but only slightly. She was still a far cry from the fearsome Soul Reaper he knew. Sunny lingered for a moment, then said evenly, "Just thinking about the future." Jet studied him for a bit. "Really, because you look like you're about to dive back into the water? This time to butcher a few abominations just for fun." She sighed, then said wistfully, "Why did you throw that one off the raft anyway?" "We didn't even retrieve the soul shards." Sunny scoffed. "What do we need soul shards for? You can't use them, and neither can I. That thing, meanwhile, was flooding the whole place with its rotten blood. We don't even have a rag to wipe it off." Indeed, soul shards were useless for both of them. Sunny needed shadow fragments, which could only be received by slaying enemies of equal or higher rank, while Soul Reaper could only replenish her essence and strengthen her core by killing living things. In the outside world, A single soul shard was worth a hefty sum of credits. But here on the raft, Sonny would have given 100 of them just for a mop. Well, maybe not 100. Sonny sighed, then returned to his chair and sat down. He was growing hungry too. Jet stood up, shakily walked out of the puddle of blood, and lowered herself to the alloy surface of the raft. Her eyes had regained a hint of their usual iciness. She remained silent for a bit, then said hoarsely, "You've been in a dismal mood this whole time." Sonny looked at her with amusement. Not only was he amused by the fact that she had apparently had enough presence of mind to pay attention to his moods, with all that crawling around and trying to kill him, but the statement itself was more than a little redundant. How else was he supposed to feel after what had happened in Falcon Scott? Millions of people had died, the members of his cohort had died, and even before that, the first irregular company had been all but wiped out. Considering everything, Sonny thought that he had handled himself pretty well in the past week. He smiled darkly. "Yeah. And why do you think that is?" Jet sighed, then looked away. "Does it matter what I think?" "I understand. Believe me, I do. In fact, I might just understand it better than you. But Sonny, do you want me to be honest?" He stared at her silently, then shrugged. "I guess." Usually, statements like this were followed by something unpleasant. She looked at the dark waves and shook her head. "I think that you have maybe forgotten who you are, and where you came from. I'm only saying it because I went through the same thing, many years ago. When I left the outskirts, I was tempted to forget the truth of things too, and I did for a little while. But the world has a way of reminding you what it really is, and what you should expect from it. Sonny, don't grow soft. You, of all people, should know better." Sonny looked at her, his face unmoving. After a few moments, he shook his head. "We are not in the outskirts anymore, and we are not the same people anymore." A pale grin slowly appeared on Soul Reaper's lips. "That is true too." She lied down and stared at the sky, silent. "After a while, though," Jet said, "maybe you're all right. Maybe people like us have to change too. Inflexible things are the most brittle, after all. But look around. With how things are going, the whole world just might end up like the outskirts soon. What are we supposed to do then?" Sonny laughed. "I'm the last person you should be asking for advice. What are we supposed to do? I have no idea. I don't even know what we are supposed to do tomorrow, let alone in the vague future. Let's just keep things simple today. We need to survive. Tomorrow, too. After that, we'll see. It would already be nice if we get the privilege of having a choice in the matter." Jet turned her head and looked at him seriously. Then, she said in a solemn tone, "I can't survive, though. I'm already dead." They stared at each other silently for a few moments, then both laughed. The raft continued to drift on the cold waves. From time to time, Saint would raise her bow and send a black arrow into the dark water. Every time she did, the spell would whisper into Sonny's ear, announcing a kill. Other times, he would have to dive into the ocean himself and help her deal with the attacking abominations. Shadow fragments slowly trickled into his soul. The next day, Sonny procured another nightmare creature for Jet to kill, and the day after that, one more. On the third day, her crow returned from its scouting trip much sooner than usual, announcing that it had seen land. Not long after that, they saw a dark line on the horizon. On the fourth day, the raft finally reached the inhospitable shore, and the two of them set foot on solid ground again. East Antarctica welcomed them with cold winds, dim twilight, and the familiar call of the whispering nightmare gates. Chapter 1064, East Antarctica. East Antarctica was many times larger than the Antarctic Center, both in terms of territory and population. Its landscape was also much more varied, with vast plains, long mountain chains, and numerous lakes that ranged from relatively small to those that were as large as seas. Somewhere out there, in that cold expanse, 21 siege capitals were currently enduring the onslaught of nightmare creatures. Each of them was comparable to Falcon Scott in size, and there were close to 900 million people protected by their walls. Sonny was looking into the distance, feeling a bit uncomfortable. In front of him was a vast plain that stretched all the way to the horizon, covered in snow. It was littered by giant boulders that stood like solemn monuments to the ancient past and cut by countless deep canyons. Here and there, hordes of abominations could be seen, flowing across the plain like dark rivers. After months spent in the mountainous Antarctic center, it was strange to be able to see that far. The world was broad and shrouded in dim twilight, looking quite surreal. Sonny felt exposed. What a bleak sight. It was still better than the poisoned wilderness of the other continents. He could freely breathe here, at least. There were also much fewer scars left by the destructive wars of the dark times here, although there were some. He could see the skeletal remains of massive war machines and the ruins of destroyed towns far in the distance, all covered with snow. With a sigh, Sonny turned around. Behind him was a slope leading to the ocean shore. Jet had just finished climbing the slope and stopped near him, breathing heavily. She still looked like a dead woman walking, but at least she was breathing again. That alone made her less unnerving. Soul Reaper remained silent for a few moments, then cursed quietly. There are still gates near us. Indeed, the call was still too strong for them to escape into the dream realm. She studied the plane before looking at him. Do you have a working communicator? Sonny shifted awkwardly, then gestured to the graceless dusk. This is a transcendent armor, you know. It has many wonderful enchantments. Sadly, one thing it doesn't have is pockets. I used to carry a few useful items inside a spatial storage memory, but those were all destroyed by the Heart of Darkness. So, no, I don't have a communicator on me. Indeed, the covetous coffer was more or less empty now. Sonny had spent most of his supplies during the escape to Falcon Scott, and what little remained was then obliterated by the dark beetles. The only thing they had not been able to destroy were the spools of diamond thread from the ebony tower. Jet sighed. Pity. Mine was frozen solid. We can't even contact Army Command then. Sonny watched the distant hordes of nightmare creatures for a while. Well, then we just have to keep moving deeper inland until we find a safe spot to use our anchors. Soul Reaper grimaced, which looked quite frightening considering her current state. She lingered for a few seconds, then shook her head. Moving inland, it won't be easy. This place is in a much better state than the Antarctic Center was, but that's just inside the siege capitals. Out here in the wilderness, the nightmare creatures still reign unopposed. You know better than anyone how hard it is to traverse an environment like this. Sonny smiled darkly. Luckily, we don't need to travel for 3,000 kilometers, and there are no civilians slowing us down. Hell, there's not even a murderous sea to flood the entire world every night. Come on, it's going to be like a picnic. He called, and a moment later, a Stygian black steed rose from the shadows. Nightmare snorted, ominous red flames burning in his eyes. The stallion's adamantine horns glinted dully in the bleak twilight of the early dawn. Sonny summoned the overpriced saddle and went about strapping it on the black courser. As he did, Jet looked at him with dead eyes. After a while, she suddenly said, "By the way, I never asked, but how the hell did you end up being mongrel? That doesn't make any sense." She paused, and then shook her head. Actually, scratch that. In retrospect, it makes too much sense. We even met once when that gate manifested in NQSC. I feel embarrassed now. Sonny coughed. I just wanted to train peacefully in the dreamscape. Who knew people would make such a ruckus about me learning a few battle styles? This whole thing went out of control really fast. Ugh, believe it or not, I actually wanted to use the mongrel persona to stay under the radar. That plan, yeah, it failed spectacularly. Jet laughed, her voice sounding hoarse and disturbing. Stay under the radar? You call challenging Morgan of Valor staying under the radar? He winced. Well, I might have gotten a little greedy, once or twice. But hey, at least I got a very good bow out of it. It's still my best ranged memory. Those Valor Forge Masters really know what they're doing, huh? Soul Reaper shook her head. You're not too bad yourself, Sonny. I still can't believe that you can craft memories. Do you know how rare aspects that allow Awakened to create memories are? There are very few such Awakened outside of Valor, and even those usually only work for the powerful legacy clans. Sonny remained silent for a few moments. By that point, there was nothing really preventing him from sharing his insights into sorcery with Jet. They had already learned a lot of each other's secrets. so one more wasn't going to make a difference. But it would be a long conversation. If he explained that his ability to create and modify memories had not come from his aspect, but rather from an attribute, he would have to explain what blood weave was, which in turn would require him to explain much more. He didn't feel like it. The knowledge would not help Soul Reaper anyway, or anyone else for that matter. As far as Sunny knew, his ability to see and interact with Spellweave was unique. Instead, Sunny glanced at Jet and asked, "What's so special about that Morgan anyway? How strong is she?" Soul Reaper sighed. "Morgan, she is strong. No master is weak, but you need to understand that there are masters, and then there are masters. Sunny. Legacies are trained from childhood to be monstrous fighters, and that's just those from lesser clans. Those from the great clans, well, you can imagine. Morgan is not just any member of Clan Valor, either. She is their princess. You should know by now who her father is." Sunny's face darkened. He finished dealing with the saddle and crossed his arms. "What about you, then? Are you stronger than Morgan?" Jet stared at him with her hollow, dead eyes. A corner of her mouth twitched upward. "Me? Maybe? Probably not. If we had to fight, I would most likely lose. Not because I am weaker, just because Morgan has the vast resources of valor behind her. Memories, echoes, soul shards. You can't imagine how much power the great clans have hoarded over the decades. People like us don't have the same foundation. So I wouldn't want to fight one of their heirs if there's an option not to. That goes for your friend Song Seishan as well." He scoffed. "It's a bit of a stretch to call us friends, and I think you're selling yourself short. I fought a couple of masters from Valor, you know. They're not that tough." Soul Reaper grinned. "Oh, really? How come you ended up stuck in the waking world for half a year then?" Sunny stared at her for a moment. "Good point." With that, he jumped into the saddle, looked at Jet from above, and offered her a hand. "Come on, climb up." She hesitated, prompting Sunny to raise an eyebrow. "What? What's wrong?" Jet cleared her throat. "What do you mean? What's wrong? I don't know how to ride a horse." "Why would I know how to ride a horse? I've never ridden one. I've never even seen one before your echo." Sunny blinked a couple of times, then suddenly laughed. That laugh surprised him, because he had not thought himself capable of laughing after Falcon Scott. "Gods, you don't need to ride anything. I'll control the horse. You just sit in front of me and don't fall off. I'm sure you can handle that much at least." Jet sighed, then grabbed his hand and jumped up. Nightmare exhaled loudly through his nostrils, confused as to why a corpse was sitting on top of him. Shadow God was also the god of death, though, so the shadow steed must have been accustomed to such things happening. Or not. In any case, he would have to deal with it. Jet looked down nervously. "Sunny, how fast is your horse exactly?" He smirked. "Pretty fast." With that, Sunny sent Nightmare forward. Soul Reaper would have yelped, but she was still having trouble breathing, so all she produced was a stifled hiss. The nightmarish steed carried a dead woman and a divine shadow as it raced across the snow-covered plain, moving deeper into the cold expanse of a doomed continent. Chapter 1065 Reaper. Nightmare was flying across the twilight plain, ignoring all obstacles. He cut through the snow, maneuvered between giant boulders, crested hills, and jumped across deep canyons, his steel hooves sending sparks flying from the weathered stone. The dark destrier was swift like a shadow, moving with innate grace and incredible speed. Sunny was sitting in the saddle holding Jet. She was basically in his embrace in the past. Being so close to her would have made his blood boil. But right now he did not feel anything. Not just because Soul Reaper was cold and lifeless like a corpse, but also because his heart was just as cold and just as lifeless. He did not feel much of anything right now, except for deep, dark rancor. There was no time to, either. Sunny might have joked about how this journey would be akin to a picnic, but in truth, their situation was still dire. East Antarctica was teeming with nightmare creatures, and he was not conceited enough to think himself capable of slaughtering entire hordes of them. Sunny knew that he was strong, but he also knew the limitations of his strength. He had just been taught a bitter lesson on that topic by the winter beast, after all. Right now, His best friends were caution and speed. His shadows were scouting ahead, searching for nightmare creatures that lay in wait. Some he would avoid, some he would escape from by relying on how swift Nightmare was. Steering clear of the migrating hordes was not too hard, but the smaller swarms and solitary abominations were a challenge. Still, Sunny had not been forced to summon Saint yet, let alone enter battle himself. They traversed a good distance, then hid in a deep ravine, waiting for a large horde to move away. After the river of monsters was gone, Nightmare dashed forward once again. Rinse and repeat. Finding a safe spot to enter the dream realm was proving to be more difficult than he had thought. There were places where the pull of the call was not strong enough to disrupt their anchors, but all of them were crawling with the nightmare creatures. Slaying the abominations was not out of the question, but Sunny felt reluctant to create a lot of noise. Who knew what else would be attracted by the sounds of a battle? And so further and further they went. Eventually, he had to admit that solving their problem was not going to be a fast affair. As such, Sunny had to change his tactics. He had not eaten in a long time, and Jet was losing essence. They had to hunt. Sunny spent some time finding a swarm of nightmare creatures that was sufficiently small and isolated. After that, he commanded Saint to put an arrow into each abomination and slow them down with the burden of peace enchantment of the black bow. Then, Sunny set Soul Reaper on the beasts and watched from the shadows as she butchered them. Jet was still weak and low on essence. However, the creatures were merely awakened and weighed down by the soul arrows on top of that. He was there to interfere should something go wrong as well. Sunny was confident that his dead companion would be able to handle the swarm, and indeed she did. To conserve her essence, Jet shunned summoning any memories and attacked the abominations with her bare hands. However, as Sunny quickly found out, Soul Reaper was a terror to behold, even while weakened and unarmed. When she struck the abominations, her hands simply passed through their flesh, directly shattering the soul cores. But more than that, Jet was already dead. Her body could still be damaged, and she would perish if it was entirely destroyed. But she was also not plagued by many of the weaknesses that most living beings shared. She could not bleed to death, but could ignore wounds that would cripple or kill any human. Jet was able to dismiss even the most severe internal injuries, continuing to fight without ever slowing down. Even if her lungs were crushed and her heart was pierced, she would simply continue to kill. Not even crushing Soul Reaper's skull would stop her. As long as she absorbed enough essence, her dead body would eventually heal, or rather, restore itself. Faced with such an unstoppable monster, even Sunny would feel a hint of dread. Good thing we're on the same side. In the end, it did not take long for Jet to slaughter the small swarm of awakened abominations. She killed them with her bare hands, regaining a little strength with each kill. Throughout all of this, her face remained unnervingly calm, like that of someone focused on a boring chore. Then, a disturbing little smile appeared on it. Sunny was forced to remember his first conversation with Teacher Julius. Back then, the old man had called Jet a murderous savage and a psychopathic killer. Sunny used to think that people were prejudiced against Jet because of her background, but now, knowing what he knew, he could see how strangers could have come to the conclusion that Soul Reaper enjoyed killing simply for the sake of killing. Very few people knew that she needed to constantly absorb essence to survive, after all. And who wouldn't be unsettled after witnessing something like this? When the last of the nightmare creatures fell to the ground, Jet straightened and closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling with satisfaction. She looked like a fiend that had just crawled from the depths of hell, awash in blood, body riddled with ghastly wounds, and eerily beautiful despite all that. Shaking his head, Sunny emerged from the shadows and went about dressing down some of the abominations to collect meat. At the same time, Saint started salvaging soul shards. Jet remained motionless for a while, then looked at him. There was some vitality now in her eyes. She smiled and said, "What are we doing now?" Sunny looked at her somberly. "Now go wash yourself. You might be dead, but I'm not. I can still smell things." Chapter 1066, Faithful Imitation. Sometime later, they were hidden in a small cave at the bottom of a deep canyon, sitting in front of a fire. A piece of monster meat was roasting on it, filling the cave with a delicious smell. Sonny was a bit sullen because it had taken all his knowledge of wilderness survival to make the small, snowy reaches of Antarctica were not exactly the best place to search for fuel. He had almost been forced to use the divine flames of the cruel sight to cook, which would inevitably result in an atrociously burned dinner for him. Currently, Sonny was passing time by trying to play a simple melody on a flute made of emerald bone. Kai would have probably become ill if exposed to his musical talent, but Jet didn't seem to mind. She stared at the fire, flames reflecting in her icy blue eyes. After a while, she suddenly said, "I can smell things too, you know, when I am sufficiently full of essence. My aspect might only give me a semblance of life, but it's a faithful imitation." Sonny lowered the emerald flute and looked at her gloomily. "What I'm hearing is that you want to rob me of some of this meat, right?" Jet lingered for a moment, then grinned. "Right. That was exactly what I meant. I am hungry too." He sighed, then hung more meat above the fire. Should have just said so. Gods, what is up with me always ending up with gluttonous women? It just never ends. Sonny turned the meat over. After a while, following a whim, he asked, "How did you end up with such a wicked flaw anyway? I thought mine was bad. But if I survived the first nightmare only to be killed by the spell during the assessment, I would have been pretty upset." He really did not understand how it would work. Jet laid down, staring at the stone roof of the cave. She sighed, then shrugged slightly. "No, it wasn't during the assessment. Actually, I did not survive the first nightmare. I was young and weak and frightened, and so I died." Soul Reaper turned her head and looked at him across the fire. "But I didn't remain completely dead. I crawled out of the grave somehow and finished the trial. I guess the role I played in the nightmare, or maybe my innate attribute, created the possibility of something like that happening. It had to be an infinitely small possibility, though, because the spell seemed rather impressed with the result. Otherwise, it wouldn't have given me a supreme aspect." Sonny did not answer, considering what he heard. It made sense. He had also made something nearly impossible happen during the first nightmare. If he had not been sent into the body of a temple slave, Shadow God would not have responded to his unintentional call, and if he did not have the fated attribute, he would have never unwittingly climbed on that altar, most likely. Many things had come together to create the possibility. He had been the one to grasp it, though. Anyone else would have failed. Sonny looked at Jet silently, thinking about her flaw. What would happen if he gave her Weaver's mask? Would she come back to life? In his heart, he knew the answer. After learning about Weaver, the spell, and the vicissitudes of fate, Sonny developed an intuition about these things. Jet would indeed come back to life, but her soul would remain shattered. And like all living beings with broken souls, she would instantly die. This time, forever. Her cruel flaw, mockingly, was the only thing that allowed her to exist. What about his own flaw? Sonny tried to imagine the life he would have had if not for the inability to lie. Would it have been easier? Would it have been harder? He would not have become enslaved, that was for sure. But he also would have never gotten close to other people, choosing to lie and manipulate them instead of trusting them out of fear of being rejected and betrayed. And for that reason, he would have probably died a long time ago. Or at least turned into something ugly and twisted. Was that the lesson he was supposed to learn? Weaver, you hypocrite. Weren't you yourself the master of lies? Sonny shook his head and concentrated on not burning the meat. These philosophical questions were a waste of time. He would still choose to get rid of his flaw in an instant if he could. Jet sighed, breaking the silence. Actually, learning my flaw was not the hardest part. The hardest part was surviving the time between the nightmare and the solstice. As you can imagine, it's not easy for a sleeper to find things to kill before entering the dream realm. I ended up having to ask for help, and asking for help ended up costing me a lot. Sonny shifted slightly. "Who did you ask?" She chuckled. "Who do you think? Just like you. I've been invited to the academy after becoming a sleeper, and just like you, I've been asked for the details of my aspect on a voluntary basis, of course. But what would an ignorant kid from the outskirts know? I told them everything, and from that moment, they had a wonderful leash to keep me on." Jet remained silent for a few moments. That is fine, though. Even without it, I would have chosen the same. I'm happy with how things turned out. Still, she grew quiet, and then added wistfully, it would have been nice to have had more of a choice. Sonny did not speak for a while. Eventually he said, yeah, it would have been nice. With that, he judged that the meat was ready and took it off the fire. Here, your dinner is ready. They concentrated on the food, content to be safe for the moment, with something tasty to eat. Sonny could vividly remember the times when eating anything, let alone actual meat, had been a cause for celebration. Jet could too. Those times were gone, and no matter how complicated and hard their lives had become, sitting in a damp cave located in the depths of a dying continent, Sonny stared at the fire and thought, I guess it's an improvement. Chapter 1067, With Your Shield. Soon, Sonny and Jet continued their journey. The landscape of East Antarctica remained the same, and so did the dangers they faced. The two of them traveled across the desolate plain, sometimes avoiding the nightmare creatures, sometimes engaging in short and furious battles. Sonny felt a little bit numb and was glad to have a task to focus on. With all his attention concentrated on keeping them alive, he had no time for unnecessary thoughts, which suited him just fine. Jet, meanwhile, was slowly recovering her powers. The more abominations she killed, the less like a corpse she looked. At some point, she allowed herself to summon a few memories, and was now wearing a light suit of armor that was made of black, lusterless leather. Now that she wielded a weapon, her lethality had soared too. For Sonny, it was fascinating to watch Jet slowly come back to life. Her eyes were once again the familiar icy blue, her movements becoming as swift, murderous, and purposeful as they had been before. This was the fearsome Soul Reaper he knew. She might not have reached her peak condition yet, but she did not resemble a shambling corpse anymore either. Most interesting of all, her lifeless shadow had regained its vitality. By now, he would have never suspected that the person in front of him was not actually alive. A few days passed, and then a few more. 2 whole weeks had passed since the destruction of Falcon Scott. They had spent half of that time crossing the strait, and half traversing the snowy plain. The plain was as inhospitable and vast as ever. Sonny made Nightmare stop, waiting for his shadows to assess the size of a distant horde of nightmare creatures. These past few days, there had been more and more abominations around, all moving in the same direction. Weaving between them was growing harder. Somewhat bored, he shifted in the saddle and asked, Hey, do you think the government considers us dead? Jet, who was sitting in front of him, turned her head and gave him an amused look. Sonny sighed. No pun intended. He knew that his friends had to be aware that he was fine. Nephis could see his runes, after all, and she would have informed the rest. However, being pronounced dead by the government was a bothersome affair. His merchant license would have been revoked, for example, which would put Aiko and the brilliant Emporium in a tight spot. His home could be auctioned off too. Jet chuckled. I don't think so. They have ways to know such things. The diviners, for example. We were probably marked as missing in action, if anyone even had time to do the paperwork. Sonny wanted to continue the conversation but then fell silent, a slight frown appearing on his face. Soul Reaper raised an eyebrow. What is it? He shook his head. Shh, listen. At that moment, the wind carried over the sound of distant thunder. It sounded like a rainstorm was raging somewhere far away, but Sonny had spent too much time with the army not to recognize it. The two of them exchanged a meaningful glance. Jet smiled. Railguns. Indeed, the thunderous sound could only be produced by the massive armaments. Commanding Nightmare to turn, Sonny sent his steed in the direction where the thunder had come from. The black stallion flew across the desolate plain, eventually cresting a tall hill. In front of them was a vast lake. In the dim twilight, its surface seemed restless and gray. The shield of ice covering the lake had long been broken, with many gargantuan carcasses floating in the cold water like dark islands. Smaller nightmare creatures were swarming around them, greedily devouring the flesh of the fallen giants. On the other side of the lake, Tall alloy walls rose from the shore, with thousands of armaments unleashing a devastating barrage of tungsten rounds on the encroaching mass of abominations. Sunny could even discern the small shapes of soldiers and awakened on the battlements. A long sigh escaped from his lips. A siege capital. Summoning the sin of solace, Sunny closed his eyes for a moment. Then he sent Nightmare galloping down the hill. The black steed rushed toward the lake, surrounded by a tide of moving shadows. Returning from the dead had turned out to be much more chaotic than Sunny expected, and fighting through the horde of nightmare creatures to reach the siege capital was not the most tumultuous part. He was actually accustomed to things like that. The reactions of the people inside the stronghold were much more intense. At first, the commander of the city defenses seemed polite, but unfriendly after all. The sudden appearance of two Ascended outside the walls during a fierce battle had put a lot of pressure on him. Fields of fire had to be rearranged. A safe corridor created, perhaps his soldiers would even have to sortie to protect the unexpected guests. However, the latter measure had not been needed. Sunny fought his own way to the wall, and then scaled it himself. And when the master in charge learned that the two Ascended had come from the Antarctic Center, his demeanor completely changed. Falcon Scott, but the man stared at them with wide eyes for a moment. Then, something akin to joyous pride ignited in them. Sunny did not really know what the master was feeling so proud about, but at least the unfriendliness immediately disappeared. God's great. This is great. I need to inform the wait, are you guys wounded? Do you need medical attention? Crap, what am I saying? Wait, Antarctic Center. Then you are Soul Reaper Jet. Ascended Jet, ma'am, of course you would make it. The news about the annihilation of the Antarctic Center Field Army must have already spread through the quadrant, so the sudden appearance of two Ascended survivors had an explosive effect. The soldiers who had been depressed and despondent about the fate of their comrades were all suddenly full of joy and ardor. It was as though their own siblings had returned alive from beyond the grave. Sunny had not experienced being stared at so intently, even when masquerading as Mongrel. The two of them were promptly brought to the local government headquarters and showered with attention, especially Jet. From what Sunny could understand, the government saint stationed in East Antarctica was coming to the siege capital to welcome her back personally. Sunny was soon going to meet the saint, too. After a short debriefing, during which the government agents could not stop staring at him, he could finally exhale and relax a little. That was strangely exhausting. Sunny spoke to Jet, agreeing to meet the next morning, and then spent a little time in the living quarters assigned to him. He enjoyed a warm shower, a scrumptious meal, and some peace and quiet. Peace and quiet. It felt so strange to not have to fight for his life and the lives of millions of other people without a reprieve. He wondered how long that peace would last. Eventually, Sunny placed a tether inside his room and quietly slipped out of the waking world. He went to visit the Ivory Tower. Chapter 1068, Changed Man. On a beautiful island of ancient trees and emerald grass, a lone figure suddenly appeared out of thin air. It was a young man with alabaster skin, wearing a simple tunic of fine black silk. He remained motionless for a few moments, then walked to the edge of the island and froze there, looking down. If not for the wind playing with the young man's black hair, he would have looked like an exquisite statue. The Ivory Island had changed a bit in the past few months. The Great Pagoda itself was the same, of course, but the comely wooden buildings created by the firekeepers now resembled a small, peaceful village that blended harmoniously into the landscape. The ancient trees of the grove now had fruit hanging from their branches, each looking ripe and delicious. The white bones of the ancient dragon were still bathed in sunlight, and a graceful ship was still swaying on the placid surface of the clear lake. There was one big change that startled Sunny a lot, though, pulling him out of his reverie. What the hell? Looking down, he did not see the familiar abyssal darkness of the sky below. Instead, he saw a mosaic of flying islands, all connected by colossal chains, slowly floating by. The Ivory Island was moving. Although the movement was very slow, it had already left the empty expanse of the tier behind and was now drifting through the clouds toward the southern border of the chained isles. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Since when can this thing move? He lingered for a while, studying the landscape below, then walked along the edge of the ivory island. It seemed that many things had changed while he was in Antarctica. Soon, Sonny reached the waters of the clear lake, which glinted and shone with the reflected sunlight. There was a stone bench near the shore, and a familiar figure sitting on it with a fishing rod in her hand. Tall, attractive, brimming with vitality, Effie was relaxing in the sun and watching the lake. Sonny walked closer and remained silent for a while. Eventually, he said, "There's actually fish in that lake?" Effie shrugged lazily. "Who knows? That's what I'm trying to find out, hopefully. I developed a taste for fish and sea monsters after being stuck on a ship for an entire month." Then, she suddenly froze and slowly turned around. Effie's hazel eyes shone with glee. "Sonny? It's you?" He smirked. "Who else would it, Arg? Gods, put me down, you savage idiot." The huntress had instantly swept him into a crushing hug, and considering their difference in height, Sonny felt his feet leaving the ground. His voice was full of righteous indignation. "I said, gods, don't you have any modesty? Let go of me." Effie exploded with laughter and put him down, and it was a good thing, too. Sonny was this close to using the feather of truth to turn himself as heavy as a huge chunk of marble. He only hesitated because that might have had no effect on her. "When did you arrive?" "No, wait, where the hell are you?" "Neff told us that you are alive, but the news from the Antarctic Center, doofus. Are you really all right? What happened?" Sonny gave her a resigned look, then shook his head. "Just now. East Antarctica, I guess. As for what happened," he sighed. Let me think for a moment. I went through 6,000 kilometers of abomination-infested mountains, received a couple of medals, traversed an endless tunnel full of elemental darkness, got killed by a titan, killed that titan back, led a convoy of tens of thousands of refugees to safety, rode a saint into the depths of the ocean to fight a corrupted terror, killed that terror, got blown up, then killed some more nightmare creatures, then lost to a different titan, crossed the strait on a raft, rode a horse all the way to the nearest siege capital. That pretty much covers it, I guess. Oh, I also learned how to play the flute, a little. Sonny paused, then looked at Effie nonchalantly. "And what's new with you?" She stared at him for a moment, then grinned, wrapped her arm around his shoulder, and pulled him toward the tower. "I see. So, the usual. Don't think that you're getting out of really telling us what happened, though we've been worried sick, you know. Kai almost had a heart attack right before we disembarked in East Antarctica, when the news of what happened in Falcon Scott reached us. Even Princess seemed a bit shaken. I swear to the dead gods, I almost saw her having a facial expression. Come, let's find the rest of the guys." Sonny estimated his chances of struggling free of Effie's hold as moderate, but then just relaxed and allowed himself to be led toward the ivory tower. That was why he had come here after all, to speak with the other members of the cohort. He needed to share a lot of practical knowledge with Kai and Effie, as well as speak with Nephis and Cassie about the great clans. But more than that, he simply wanted to see them. There was a lot of darkness and confusion in his heart, but his friends, his cohort, despite all the complicated matters between them, they were like a small island of stability in the chaotic, unpredictable, deadly world they were all living in. He had missed them all, even though perhaps he shouldn't have. The 4 months Sonny had spent in Antarctica changed a lot of things, making some seem unimportant and some more significant than they used to be. He shook his head. Fine, I'm coming. Can you let me go now?" Sonny sighed. At least she did not joke about the graceless dusk. At that moment, Effie gave him a mischievous look. "Doofus, I couldn't help but notice what a nice dress you have." He gritted his teeth. "Tunic. It's a tunic, a transcendent armor-type memory, which is not a dress, but a tunic. Are you blind, or what?" Chapter 1069, Secrets of the Island. The great hall of the ivory tower made Sonny shiver, just like the last time he had seen it. It was bathed in bright sunlight that poured through tall and narrow windows. A circle of chains lay in the middle of the hall that was the gateway. There was no one here, but Effie pulled Sonny to a staircase that led to the underground level of the tower. Its roots were deep, seemingly reaching into the very heart of the island. That stairwell spiraled along the outer wall of the pagoda, and there was a tapestry of beautiful carvings on the ivory stone. The carvings told the stories of the golden age of the Kingdom of Hope, long before it had been destroyed by the Lord of Light. Wait, I don't think there was a way down before. Was it hidden? Confused, Sunny silently followed Effie. Eventually, the two of them reached a vast circular chamber at the bottom of the stairwell. Sunny had never been here before, but expected it to be similar to the lowest level of the Ebony Tower. And indeed, it was. However, it was also entirely different. The duplicate tower created by Nether was full of darkness, and there was a ghastly mountain of discarded mannequins occupying the center of its underground level. This chamber, however, was suffused with light. There was a vast and inconceivably complicated runic circle carved into the floor of the chamber, and within it. Sunny stared, not even noticing the two people studying the circle. His body shivered slightly. Is that? Floating in the air at the center of the chamber was a rough, radiant crystal. It was larger than Sunny, and gave him a feeling of sublime, awesome, indescribable power. The crystal was like a miniature sun, flooding the underground hall with soft light. Reality itself seemed to ripple and shine around it. It was like nothing Sunny had ever seen. A familiar voice answered, pulling him out of his astonishment. Yes. From what we can tell, this is a divine soul shard. He slowly turned his head and looked at Cassie, who was sitting in front of the runic circle, surrounded by notebooks, etchings, and writing implements. She was wearing simple jeans and a white t-shirt, her pale gold hair gathered in a messy knot bun. Sunny lingered for a moment, not knowing what to say. A divine... At that moment, however, a different voice interrupted him. Sunny. He looked up, only now noticing Kai, who was hovering high above the runic circle, near the tall ceiling of the chamber. The archer was already descending, and with considerable speed, at that. Oh no. Before Sunny could react, he was subjected to another hug. God, Sunny, you had us all worried. He gently struggled out of Kai's embrace and met his friend's blinding smile with a pale one of his own. Ah, sorry. I guess I'm just a worrisome person. I only died once in the past couple of months, though, so you needn't have worried. Then, Sunny looked past the startled archer, stared at the radiant crystal, and took a deep breath. Anyone want to explain to me what is going on? Cassie stood up, sighed, and massaged her knees. Then, she gave him a soft smile. I am glad that you are back too, Sunny. With that, she took a few steps back and gestured to the floor of the circular chamber. Take a look at that. He looked down, only now paying attention to the runic circle carved into the white stone. The weave of runes was vast, complicated, and possessed a disturbing familiarity. Sunny frowned. What is that sickening feeling? Then, he mentally scaled the runes to many times their size and tilted his head a little. The runes were very similar in style and shape to those of the Red Colosseum. Just looking at them reminded him of the harrowing months he had spent in the cage below the arena. Hope's sorcery. Cassie nodded. Indeed. We continued to explore the tower after you left and eventually unlocked the path to this chamber. Our reaction was more or less the same as yours. She shook her head. The Ivory Island holds more secrets than we thought. Well, Nephis will probably be able to explain it better. In any case, we quickly realized that these runes resembled the ones you had encountered in the ancient theater, so the Firekeepers went on an expedition to the western edges of the Chained Isles. The Red Colosseum has long turned into a ruin and was teeming with all kinds of dreadful nightmare creatures. It took some effort to eradicate them and clear the floor of the arena. A ruin? Good. Kai nodded. Effie and I couldn't participate because we were tied up settling into our roles in the Second Army. However, since Cassie returned, I've been helping her study the runic circle from time to time. A high vantage point helps see it in its entirety, and so on. We've made a little progress even. Mostly because Cassie had spent a lot of time with Noctis and learned many things, especially about that flying ship of his. She nodded. Yes. In fact, I suspect that the enchantments of the ship were derived from some of Desire's creations. There are many similarities. So, after months of study and comparisons, we managed to decipher a tiny portion of the circle. It is not much, but it did allow us to access one of the island's hidden functions. Sunny just stared at her silently for a few moments. Then he said, Is that why the island is moving? Cassie nodded with a small smile. Indeed. We are now able to move the Ivory Island, albeit very slowly. He hesitated for a bit, then shook his head. Am I the only one who is freaked out by a divine damned soul shard? It's divine. Where did Hope get a divine soul shard? Effie glanced at the radiant crystal and shrugged. There were only 6 gods, but there were plenty of creatures of the divine rank, the former mistress of this tower included. Sometimes they fought side by side, sometimes they fought against each other. Well, of course they did. Considering how terrifying this demon of desire was, is it so surprising that she had a divine soul shard or two? In fact, I'm kind of disappointed that we didn't find way more incredible treasures in her basement. Makes sense, though, the damned dragon must have cleaned it all out ages ago. She glanced up, in the direction where the bones of Sevirax were wrapped around the great pagoda. Kai's face darkened a little. He sighed. Why are we talking about this stuff anyway? Sonny is finally back. He has to be sick of military rations. Let's go, guys. I bet dinner is almost ready. Sonny gave him a long look. Mind if I stay and drool at that shard a bit longer? I mean, it's a divine soul shard. Can you imagine how much that thing costs? Kai shook his head and said, his voice full of resoluteness. No, you can't. I'm going to feed you. And don't even think about resisting. Sonny looked at the radiant crystal one last time and sighed. Well, all right. I guess I can go for a bite. Chapter 1070, Dysfunctional Citadel. As they went back up the stairs, Sonny couldn't help but think about what he had seen in the stone chamber at the root of the great pagoda. The circle of runes, the sublime crystal hovering in the middle of it that had to be the core of Hope's tower as well as of the whole island, the very heart of the citadel. But what was its purpose? An easy conclusion would be that the divine soul shard was the energy source that powered the enchantments keeping the Ivory Island afloat. But that did not make any sense. The runes had been carved by the demon of desire herself, which meant that the enchantments had been created before her kingdom was destroyed. Back then, it had been simply a prospering land. There had been no islands, let alone flying ones. Come to think of it, Sonny was not entirely clear on how the Kingdom of Hope had become the Chained Isles, had she suspended the remnants of her shattered kingdom above the devouring flames herself in order to preserve at least some of it, or had it been arranged by Sun God. There were other questions, too. If the divine soul shard was the heart of the citadel, was it powering the gateway? But the gateway was only created recently, after the Seat of Nightmare had been conquered. The spell made it appear, not hope. Had the spell created entirely new enchantments, or built upon the existing ones? Cassie had said that there were other functions of the citadel she had yet to master. What were they, exactly? Now that Sonny started thinking about it, he realized that he didn't really know much about citadels. That word just used to describe a human stronghold built around a gateway in the dream realm. He had visited 2, the sanctuary of Noctis and the Ivory Tower. No, actually 3, the Crimson Spire would have become a citadel too, if it had not been destroyed. Was there perhaps more to the citadels than he had known? Did all of them have hidden functions? Sonny glanced at Cassie, who was tracing the stone wall with her fingers as she ascended the stairs. I actually learned a bit about Hope's runic sorcery back in the nightmare. If you want, we can compare notes later. Cassie turned her head and smiled with some excitement. Really, that would be very helpful. Sonny sighed. Of course it would be. Neither of them had any hope of truly learning runic sorcery, or Hope's magic, as Noctis had called it, in their lifetime. However, learning how to decipher and use already existing enchantments was not out of the question. After all, a person could swing a sword without knowing how to forge it. Runic sorcery was different from weaving, but perhaps just as ingenious. In the primordial era of the dream realm, mortals had only known one type of sorcery, the sorcery of names. They were capable of invoking the true names of things to wield great power, but speaking those names aloud was often an impossible task. Hope, however, had invented the concept of writing and gifted it to humans. With the knowledge of writing, humans learned how to transcribe true names and did not need to speak them aloud anymore. More than that, the names could be bound to material objects through writing, thus granting the invocations permanence, and could also be shaped into songs and phrases. However, It was still all based on the knowledge of true names. Without knowing the meaning of the name, transcribing it would have no effect. And there was no way for either Sunny or Cassie to learn that in less than a few centuries. They were both mortals, after all. So all they could do was use runic enchantments left behind by someone far more powerful and knowledgeable. Sunny shook his head slightly, wondering what secrets the ivory tower truly held. They made their way back to the first level, and then went higher. In the past, the firekeepers had made their home on the upper levels of the ivory tower, but now it was empty. The awakened following Nephis and Cassie had moved to the wooden village outside. The second level, the third level, the fourth, finally, they arrived at the fifth, second-to-last level of the pagoda. It was separated into many halls and chambers, some of which had been recently refurbished to serve various purposes. It all resembled the interior of a beautiful but rather bare-bones manor. A mouth-watering aroma was coming from a half-open door at the end of one of the corridors. Effie hurried toward it with gleaming eyes. Behind the door was a brightly lit hall that was made into a kitchen. Sunny noticed that someone had put a lot of effort into either building cooking appliances or bringing them here from the waking world. The latter could only be done by a master, of course. Although most advanced technology did not work in the dream realm, similar to how it failed in the vicinity of Nightmare Gates, more primitive devices functioned perfectly well. There were expensive, but much more convenient spell-tech solutions too. So while you couldn't really have something like an electric stove or a refrigerator here, you could have a wood stove or an icebox, as well as analogs that worked on essence. Sunny also noticed several large crates of cooking ingredients, beverages, and snacks, which had obviously been delivered from the waking world by the members of the cohort. He did not pay that much attention, though, because there was someone standing in front of the stove, stirring the source of the delicious aroma. A generous amount of fried rice that was being cooked in a bowl-shaped frying pan. Tall, slender, with beautiful silver hair, and wearing white apron. Wait, an apron? Sunny blinked a couple of times. Hearing their steps, Nephis looked over her shoulder and called out, "It's almost ready." Then, she suddenly tensed and slowly turned around. Neph's face remained as calm as ever, but there was a hint of agitation in her striking gray eyes. "Sunny?" He remained silent for a moment, then looked past her. "Sure. You better turn around, though. Don't burn our dinner." Chapter 1071. Familiar Role. Nephis stared at Sunny for a couple moments, then briefly glanced at her apron and quietly cleared her throat. "Right." She turned around and got back to stirring the rice. A couple seconds later, she added without looking back, "You'll have to wait for a couple more minutes. And welcome back, Sunny. Did you make it out of the Antarctic Center all right?" Sunny wondered how much Changing Star knew about the situation in the southern quadrant as he followed Cassie, Effie, and Kai to sit behind a dining table. Settling on a wooden chair which was far inferior to his own shadow chair, he sighed. "I wouldn't call it all right. But yes, I made it out. I'm already inside a siege capital in East Antarctica." Neff's shoulder moved slightly. "That's good." Effie grabbed a few cans of something sugary and refreshing, then pushed one towards Sunny. "Kai and I spent a whole month in transit aboard those giant ships. We were in the first batch of the Second Army to arrive, so we've been in East Antarctica for about a week. Gods, I thought the ocean was bad, but Antarctica... I have never seen that many nightmare creatures in my life, not even here in the dream realm. It's like the two worlds switched places." Kai nodded somberly. "Indeed. Even though there are secure evacuation corridors between the inland siege capitals and the harbor strongholds, we had to fight a couple battles just to reach our designated sector. Luckily, there were no casualties. The Second Army was twice the size of the First Army, so it was going to take 2 trips for the naval convoys to bring all of it to the southern quadrant. Both Effie and Kai were in the first wave of reinforcements, which was why they had made landfall around the time Sunny himself reached East Antarctica." Sunny looked at them, wondering. East Antarctica was a large place, and it was not a given that their paths would cross until the end of the operation. He really hoped that they would, though. Effie shook her head. "Enough about us. What happened to you? You look a bit different, Sunny." He did indeed look slightly different because of the marble shell. However, Sunny knew that that was not what Effie meant. He sighed and took a sip from the can she had given him. Well, as you know, I was assigned to the first irregular company. In the first month after our contingent of the Army made it to the Antarctic Center, things were more or less fine. The field army split into 7 divisions, with one remaining in the city of Falcon Scott, while 6 others moved south to establish 6 more siege capitals. Sonny paused. I was assigned to the southernmost siege capital, and then went on a mission to retrieve a VIP from a remote research station. That was when everything went from bad to worse. The chain of nightmares had gone into overdrive, and 3 whole titans spawned in the Antarctic Center, including an especially troublesome corrupted one. It took a lot to keep his voice from shaking at the mention of the winter beast. The others looked at him intently, and Sonny sighed. I ended up stuck in that research station for about a month, waiting to be evacuated by a battleship. However, the ship never arrived, and everyone in the settlement was eventually eviscerated by a powerful terror. My people and I were the only ones to survive. We were in a bit of a predicament, though, because by that point, reaching the nearest siege capital was more easily said than done. He leaned back, remembering LO-49 and the start of the calamitous march north. His face darkened. And then we learned that the nearest siege capital had actually already been destroyed. So I had to go to the second nearest one, picking up a few refugees in the process. That was when I got trapped in that weird tunnel. Thanks for helping me out, by the way. He forced out a smile, looking at Nephis and Cassie. Cassie shook her head. Of course. We were quite surprised. The way you delivered the message, very original to say the least. And, very you. Hopefully the little kernel of insight I gleaned was of some help. Sonny chuckled. It helped. I still don't know what that thing in the tunnel was, but we managed to escape from it for a time. Sadly, the second nearest siege capital also ended up being destroyed, and so I had to lead the train of refugees all the way back to Falcon Scott. That was a hell of a journey, but what happened next was even worse. We held the last siege capital for close to 3 weeks, and in that time, about 90% of civilians were evacuated to East Antarctica. After saying that, he remained silent for a while. Eventually, Sonny grimaced. The remaining 10%, though, all died, as did millions of people in the other destroyed siege capitals. Saint Tyrus, you know her, had been holding back that corrupted Titan I mentioned. Once she was defeated, the Titan swept in and killed everyone. The whole field army was wiped out. I'm hard to kill, so I survived well, and here I am. A somber silence settled in the brightly lit hall. Nephis and Cassie did not speak, probably not knowing what to say, and neither did Effie and Kai. The latter 2 were especially grim, because they were now in Antarctica too. So many people had died, and what had happened to Sonny could very easily happen to the 2 of them as well. Eventually, Kai sighed. I'm so sorry, Sonny. You've been through a lot. Sonny closed his eyes for a moment. The heart-wrenching memories of the Antarctic Center clawed at his heart, making him want to surrender to a dark and boundless emotion. With a smile, he shook his head. We've all been through a lot. On the Forgotten Shore, and in our second nightmares, we've been through hell after hell. But it did really feel different this time. Maybe because I was responsible for other people, and maybe because it was happening right here on Earth, not in some distant place. With that, Sonny glanced at Effie and Kai, then said, trying to cheer them up, You don't have to worry too much, though. Now that the operation is in its second phase, things will calm down a little. East Antarctica is in a much better spot than the Antarctic Center. There are more soldiers, more awakened, more saints, and much fewer obstacles in the way. Sure, it's going to be a tough campaign, and unexpected variables are bound to emerge, but I feel like the worst part is over. With some luck, we will all manage. He smiled, then secretly threw a glance at Nephis. She was now a part of one of those unexpected variables. Would Neph have something to say to him? As if feeling his gaze, Changing Star turned around and walked their way, soon placing plates of fragrant rice and vegetables in front of each member of the cohort. Her apron had disappeared at some point in the past few minutes. Sitting down, Nephis pushed the plate with the biggest portion towards Sonny, which caused Effie to stare at her indignantly. Neph coughed. What? Eat, everyone, before it gets cold. They turned their attention to the food, and for a while, Sonny felt delightfully at peace. It was so strange he had gone through so much, and had changed so much, But now that he was back with his friends, it was so easy to slide into a familiar role, to smile and laugh as if he was the same old Sonny. It felt natural, even if a small hidden corner of his heart remained dark and cold, untouched by the peaceful warmth of their reunion. Still, it wasn't a bad feeling. Allowing himself to relax, Sonny concentrated on the food. It had been a long time since he got to eat something Nephis had cooked. The fried rice with vegetables was indeed much better than military rations. It was delicious. Chapter 1072, Brief Levity. The small dinner was very enjoyable for Sonny. In fact, after being under crushing pressure for pretty much the entire past 4 months, this sudden moment of levity made him feel like he was on the verge of melting into a puddle of jelly. It was as though the outer edges of his being had been turned into a harsh, rigid shell by the immense strain of the disastrous war. And now that the shell suddenly disappeared, he could not quite remember how to keep himself together without it. Still, he managed. The 5 of them ate and chatted relaxedly, sharing small details about their lives in recent months. Sonny especially had a lot to say. All of them were experienced combatants, but he now possessed precious knowledge of the intricacies of the type of war Effie and Kai would soon be exposed to. The southern campaign was different from the usual tribulations Awakened faced in the dream realm. The terrain was different, the climate was different, even the cycle of day and night was different. More importantly, the forces arranged against them were different, as were the forces on their side. In Antarctica, Ascended and Awakened had the support of mundane soldiers and modern technology. Sonny had learned a tremendous amount of lessons about how to bring the two together, in no small part because he had commanded a mixed force of Awakened and Mundanes in conditions so desperate that anything less than perfect cohesion would have meant death. Unlike him, who had been a part of a small and exceedingly elite unit, both Kai and Effie were placed in command of large detachments consisting of rank-and-file soldiers. To them, this practical knowledge was more valuable than gold. Small things like using fire resistance enchantments to increase the tactical flexibility of MWP flamethrowers, efficiently triaging mundane soldiers that had been infected by the spell, managing the ammo consumption of the vehicle turrets in relation to the essence consumption of the Awakened, and 1,000 more, could only be learned through experience or being taught by someone with such experience. Of course, his friends were bright people and immensely talented warriors. In time, they would have reached the same conclusions, but that time could very well cost many lives. That was why Sonny was in a hurry to share his hard-won expertise. The only problem was that actually going over everything was bound to take way more time than they had, so at some point he simply used the Blessing of Dusk enchantment of the Graceless Dusk to establish a mental connection and share his insights in a more direct fashion. Needless to say, his sudden ability to transmit thoughts telepathically startled his friends greatly. Effie flinched, almost falling from her chair, and looked at him with wide eyes. What the hell, Sonny? You're in my head. Sonny paused, suddenly realizing that he should have probably warned them before establishing the connection. He chuckled awkwardly. Oh, sorry, I should have explained first. One of the enchantments of my tunic, it's a tunic, you troglodyte, allows me to establish a mental link with other living beings. Don't worry, though, I can't read your thoughts, and in your case, Effie, I wouldn't even want to. Gods, I shudder just imagining what is going on in that depraved head of yours. In any case, you have to willingly transmit a thought for me to receive it. Imagine it as thinking out loud. She hesitated for a few moments, then instantly sent over a mental image that made Sonny spit out his drink and glare at her with murder in his eyes. Effie grinned, then waved a hand. All right, I get it. What a great enchantment. With the help of the Blessing of Dusk, the conversation flowed much faster. Eventually, though, both Kai and Effie had to leave. They had just arrived at their assigned siege capital after all, so there was a lot for them to do. In fact, days like this, when all 5 could freely gather in the Dream Realm together, were bound to be rare until the Antarctica operation was over. Cassie excused herself too, returning to the root chamber of the tower to continue studying the runic circle. Sonny and Nephis were left alone in the sunlit hall. He hesitated. Throughout the dinner, Sonny had avoided speaking about the matters that gnawed on him, the war between the great clans and their plans for Antarctica. In fact, he felt reluctant to start that conversation even now. However, he had already learned the unpleasant lesson of what happened when he postponed important conversations until the last possible moment. Sunny's relaxed expression slowly changed to one of grim sharpness. Looking at Nephis, he leaned back a little and asked, "You told me before that valor and song would most likely turn the southern quadrant into their private battlefield. How sure are you of it now after 4 months?" Neph lingered for a while, her beautiful gray eyes clear and calm. Then she said, "I am pretty sure. In fact, it has already been set in stone." Sunny let out a resentful sigh. Damn them! He gritted his teeth, staring into the distance with a harsh expression. Suddenly, the shadows in the corners of the hall seemed much darker. "This is insanity." Sunny shook his head, feeling a strong desire to break something. "This is pure madness, Neph. I've been told that the great clans have long given up on the waking world. Standing aside and watching the lives of hundreds of millions of people be destroyed is already unforgivable. But coming to mess things up even further is just beyond all reason. I just don't understand." Changing Star looked at him evenly. Then a strange, joyless smile slowly appeared on her face. "I can help you with that." Sunny frowned. "What exactly do you mean?" Nephis sighed, then looked away. "You've done a lot in the past 4 months, Sunny. Cassie and I might not have gone through as much as you have, but we haven't been idle either. We've managed to discover a few things, although not as many as I would have liked. After all, it has only been a few months. They don't trust me much yet." She paused for a moment. This war between valor and song has always seemed a little strange, and now I think I know why. A lot of things still remain unclear, but we did solve the most important mystery. Changing Star looked at him and said, "The true reason why the great clans are at war. Do you want me to tell you? That will certainly help you understand." Chapter 1073, The Fourth Step. Sunny remained silent for a while, looking at Nephis with a somber expression. Eventually, a dark smile appeared on his face. "Do tell." Neph sighed, then stood up and started gathering the dirty plates. Her movements were calm and unhurried, as if they had not been discussing matters that could very well decide the fate of the whole world. "Help me do the dishes?" Sunny blinked, amused by the mundane banality of her request. He lingered for a moment, then shook his head and went about giving Changing Star a hand. As they cleaned the plates in the cold water produced by either a memory or the ivory tower itself, she started talking. "I've known for a long time that the great clans, especially Song and Valor, were opposed to each other, despite being outwardly unified. The symptoms of the approaching war were quite apparent, if one knew where to look. However, the reasons for this animosity have always eluded me. Key Song and Anvil had been comrades once, after all. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter. My father was their comrade too." Sunny hesitated for a moment. "Do they really need a reason, though? Power is already reason enough. Both have an unimaginable amount of it, but in my experience, those who possess great power are the ones most greedy for more." Nephis slowly shook her head. "Maybe, but they are not fools. This war of theirs is too ill-timed and too destructive. The great clans stand to lose more from it than they would gain. There are other powers to consider too. The House of Night, for example. Even the government, or Asterion, wherever he might be, if both Song and Valor are weakened by the clash. The lesser threats might very well swoop in to finish off the victor." She paused for a bit. "So I suspected there had to be something else at play. And as it turns out, there is, although I only learned of it recently. I still don't know why the hostility between the two great clans has suddenly escalated so much now. Of all the times it could have, now seems like a terrible time to go to war. However, I think I do know the true source of their conflict." Sunny glanced at her, consumed by tense anticipation. It felt as though he was about to learn a great secret, one that would finally let him see the full picture clearly, or at least show him the way to the truth. Very few people in the world could have uncovered this mystery. But Changing Star herself had infiltrated one of the great clans, while Cassie was helping her. And now he was going to benefit from their effort. Sunny remained silent, waiting. Nephis calmly wiped the last plate, put it on the drying rack, and turned to him. White sparks ignited in her eyes. It has to do with the sovereigns and their domains. He raised an eyebrow. Domains? I've heard a few people use that word. However, I still don't know what it means. Nephis nodded, then headed toward the stairs to the sixth, highest level of the tower. Come, if you want. Sunny gave her a dark look, then followed. As they ascended the stairs, Neph spoke. To people who know about the existence of the sovereigns, domains are synonymous with their rule. So, one might say that they belong to a domain, meaning that they serve one of the supremes. However, there is a deeper secret here. As I found out, domains are not just an abstract concept, in fact. They are very real. A domain is an extension of a sovereign's aspect. Sunny stared at her silently. He had suspected as much, but never had any proof. More than that, he had no idea what that statement actually implied. So it is an ability, like the transformation ability that the saints possess. One that affects an area, perhaps? Neph frowned. Not exactly. Once a transcendent becomes a supreme, they do unlock another ability, one that is tremendously powerful, at that. You might call it a supreme, ultimate, or pinnacle ability, I guess, but a domain is something separate from the supreme ability. It is another innate function of the aspect, just like controlling soul essence or accessing the soul sea is a natural progression of one's ability to express their power. She lingered for a moment. Within their domain, a sovereign is nearly invincible. Mind you, I don't know everything about it just yet. I've just gleaned bits and pieces of information where I could. The point is, each step of the path of ascension, as well as of the path of corruption, has its own meaning. The first path is the ascent toward divinity, while the second is the descent into profanity. They reached the sixth level, which, just like the first, only encompassed one spacious hall. This one was smaller than the great chamber where Hope had once been chained and suffused with bright sunlight. It was empty and Spartan, with only a few pieces of wooden furniture and a bed occupying a small section of the vast stone floor, the white curtains of the bed's canopy billowing in the wind. Apparently, this was where Nephis herself lived. She led Sunny to one of the 4 large balconies and stopped there, looking at the breathtaking vista of the boundless blue sky. The clouds were rolling past the ivory island like a swirling, radiant sea. Those who are dormant can awaken. After that, some rise above the mundane and take the first step toward the divine, becoming ascended. Others descend into the abyss of corruption and become fallen. That is the meaning of the second step, rise or fall. The essence of the third step is transformation. Ascended truly transcend their mundane origin, becoming transcendent. Fallen become corrupted by the dark abyss, and are thus called corrupted. Sunny looked at her and frowned. What about the fourth step, then? What about the great and the supreme? Nephis met his gaze, her cold gray eyes shining with the reflected sunlight. The essence of the fourth step is authority. I guess a god has to be a god of something or someone. At the fourth step, the sovereigns start to coalesce their domains, and that, I think, is much more important than all other forms of power they possess. I think only the domain can pave the way for a supreme to take the next step on the path of ascension and become sacred. Chapter 1074, Authority. Sunny looked down at the rolling sea of clouds. He was considering Neph's words. Some of what she said was common knowledge. People had long theorized that there was a profound meaning to the way the spell named different ranks. Ascended were called ascended because they had risen above their human nature. Transcendent were called transcendent because they had broken past it, assuming some traits of the divine. The Supremes, then, took another step toward godhood, and that step seemed to be tied to authority. It made sense, really, because that progression was similar to how nightmare creatures grew in class. The tyrants were all about rule and authority, too. However, there was something in what Nephis had told him that caught Sunny's attention. He glanced at her and asked, "Did you say start to coalesce their domains?" That word meant much more than one would think. If there was a start, there also had to be an end. Much more importantly, it hinted that a domain was not something that Supremes simply gained. There was a process to it. Neph smiled. Indeed, you caught on to the very heart of the issue. The domains are not set in stone as all other forms of power. They can change and be changed. Simply put, a domain can grow. In fact, I suspect that it must grow for a supreme to realize his or her potential, and therefore a domain can also be diminished. Sunny's eyes gleamed. He was starting to understand. I see. I see now, of course. It makes so much sense. He looked at her intently, the shadows around him growing darker. And how exactly do domains grow? Changing Star lingered for a moment, then turned to look at the sky. Well, it is hard to say. All domains are unique after all, just like all aspects are unique. However, there are some common things that all of them most likely share. So I would say that there are two ways. One is the natural way. That was how the ancient people of the Dream Realm spread their authority and built their domains. Sunny slowly nodded. People like Noctis and Oro of the Nine had also been awakened. However, he knew very little about how they reached higher ranks of power. There had been no nightmares in the ancient past, nor had there been the spell. The spell. Nephis noticed the look of realization on his face and nodded. Yes, the spell provides training wheels for the awakened of the lower ranks, creating a harrowing but swift and streamlined road for them to reach greater power. There are so many tools it gives us that we take for granted. So why wouldn't it provide assistance to the sovereigns as well? The spell has created a straightforward way for the Supremes to expand their domains. She took a step back and placed her hand on the ivory wall of the great pagoda. Do you get it yet? Sunny stared, silent. A few moments later, he said in a low voice, The citadels? Neff smiled. Correct. No matter what authority you wield, it can only spread through two mediums, I think. Territory or people. The citadels naturally encompass both. We knew all along that the spell creates the gateways, which serve as the heart and purpose for the existence of the citadels. However, as it turns out, there is more to it. Much more. She lingered for a few moments, then frowned. I am not too sure about the true scope of what functions the citadels hide. What I do know, however, is that saints already have the ability to bind them. We have not found out what this binding entails. Exactly. But I think it is safe to say that if a saint serves a sovereign and takes control of a citadel, the sovereign's domain expands. Changing Star hesitated. It also seems that not all citadels are created equal. There are some that are very special and much more desirable, like Bastion or Ravenheart, or this island. It is not a coincidence that each of the great clans had fought to conquer one of the locations marked on the map you found in the Ebony Tower. Sunny looked at her sharply, considering the implications. Bastion, Ravenheart, the Ivory Tower, from what he knew, each of these places had served as the stronghold of one of the demons. The House of Night was in possession of the fourth one. The fifth was located in the utterly lethal Hollow Mountains, which Clan Valor had nevertheless put a lot of effort into exploring, disregarding the danger. And the sixth one, the last one, considering that Weaver did not seem to have possessed a stronghold, the sixth one was the Black Pyramid far to the east, the pyramid that seemed to be somehow tied to the chain of nightmares. Sunny took a deep breath. So, what exactly are you trying to say? Nephis shook her head. Isn't it obvious? Both Anvil of Valor and Key Song need to expand their spheres of influence to perfect their domains. However, there are only so many human citadels to go around, which means that two domains, or at least these particular two domains, can't coexist. For one to be perfected, it has to swallow the other. She grew quiet for a moment, and then said somberly, That is the true reason for the war between their clans. Sunny looked away, an ugly grimace contorting his face. A sense of dark, vicious anger was smoldering in his heart. Neff sighed. Antarctica will be the first major battlefield of this war, but it won't be the last. Most of it will happen in the Dream Realm after both sides deliver their strikes. But the first act is also the most important. If one of the clans manages to gain momentum in the southern quadrant, their advantage might very well snowball into an unstoppable avalanche. So, their clash in Antarctica will be extremely fierce and bloody. In fact, Anvil is sending his own daughter there. Morgan will lead Valor forces in the southern quadrant. That alone shows how serious his intentions are. Changing Star studied the clear skies, then turned to Sunny and said, her voice even, So now do you understand? Chapter 1075, Know the Enemy. Sunny remained silent for a while, responding only when the pressure of the flaw started to turn into searing pain. Yeah, I think I understand. Many things became clearer now. Finally, he knew more about the sovereigns and the power they wielded. Awakened, masters, and saints, all of them were bestowed with great strength, but that strength was of a personal kind. Supremes were, without doubt, even more fearsome warriors, however. Their true advantage lay in their authority. He was not too certain about what exactly a domain did. Even Nephis did not know the details, after all, but understood the concept. A domain was a physical manifestation of a sovereign's aspect, a territory where their rule was supreme. And that manifestation, while representing their personal strength, relied on external factors to exist and grow. Authority, influence, power over someone, and not just yourself. All of these things were conveniently intertwined in the form of citadels, which the spell created. Citadels. Sonny looked down, as if trying to pierce the ivory tower with his gaze. Then, he sighed. There were still a lot of unanswered questions. On the surface, the intention of the sovereigns seemed obvious. Well, with the exception of Asterion, who was the most mysterious of the three. They had established their nascent domains in the unique citadels that had once belonged to the demons, and then slowly expanded their rule, uplifting loyal ascended to sainthood, and eliminating those transcendent who refused to swear fealty to them, thus failing to become the vessels of their domains. The only two exceptions were the House of Night, and to a much lesser extent, the government. Both were convenient to have around and fulfilled a necessary function. The seat of power of the great clan Night, on top of that, was located in the deadly waters of the Stormsea. Launching an invasion into their territory was a dire task. But what about Professor Obel's theory? Indeed, something did not add up. If Anvil of Valor and Ki Song were so obsessed with perfecting their domains, then why were they suppressing the emergence of saints? The more transcendence there were, the more human citadels there would be in the dream realm, and the more territory they would be able to conquer. Come to think of it, if they really had no choice but to wage war on each other, then why had they waited for 2 decades to start it? Why were they only attempting the conquest now? Why had they waited for the chain of nightmares to descend upon the southern quadrant? Sonny frowned, then glanced at Nephis. I feel like we are still missing a key piece of information. This timing, it is just too strange and hateful. Of course, there was a possibility that all of it was just a coincidence. Maybe Ki Song simply decided to use the power imbalance that the death of Saint Cormac and Mordret's ascension had created. But Sonny felt like there was more to this war than they thought. Neff leaned on the parapet of the sunlit balcony and sighed. We certainly do. The sovereigns have many secrets, and I won't claim to know all of them. But does it really matter what they are hiding? The truth remains the same. Sonny scoffed. She was right. Nephis was determined to destroy the sovereigns, because they were suppressing humanity in its conquest of the spell, and more importantly, stood in her way. She did not care what motivated the Supremes, and neither did Sonny. He hated them all the same. Valor and Song deserved each other, as far as he was concerned. But Antarctica was about to be swept up in their treasonous strife, and that he could not allow to happen. Look at you go. Do you even hear yourself? Who are you to defy the great clans? Do you imagine yourself to be someone capable of stopping them? You're definitely not sure. You have some power, but in the grand scheme of things, you're just a bug. A single master, no matter how strong, is only capable enough to be an expendable pawn. Sonny gritted his teeth. It was true, no matter how incensed he was, there was nothing he could do. The best Sonny could hope to achieve was to minimize the damage that the clash of the great clans was bound to do to the evacuation effort, a little. That only made him angrier. Well then, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I will prepare, learn their weaknesses, and try to suppress the fallout of their despicable acts as much as I can. Luckily, Sonny knew just the right person to provide him with information. Knowing what the opponent was planning came first. He remained silent for a few moments, then glanced at Neff. So, what exactly is going to happen? What will be their first move? She smiled wistfully. In a few months, the great clans will announce that they are sending reinforcements to the southern quadrant. Both Song and Valor will dispatch a strong force to Antarctica, but not too strong. A couple more saints, a dozen or two masters, and a few hundred awakened. Officially, their mission will be to support the evacuation army in fighting the nightmare creatures. In reality, however, they are being sent there to fight each other. Sunny scowled, slightly confused. How, though? By now, most of the human forces on the continent are concentrated in the siege capitals, with very little reason to venture outside. Are these saints and their forces going to just go and attack the cities? Nephis shook her head. No, at least I think they won't. Not unless there is a very good reason to. In truth, they won't be staying behind the walls of the siege capitals most of the time, because they have a secondary goal as well, one that requires going outside and attacking the nightmare creatures. He tilted his head a little. And what goal might that be? Changing Star simply looked at him, and a moment later Sunny's eyes widened slightly. The pyramid.